Check 1, 2.
Mine's permanently broken.
All right, I call this meeting back to order. Next, we have a resolution for the 2019 legislative programs. Mr. Blair will be presenting.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I thought we would go through this piece by piece, and first up for your consideration will be the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission legislative packet. I wanted to ask Mr. David Blunt to come up and just give a brief presentation of this year's package.
Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council, and I will be very brief this evening. Just to let you know that speaking really to the priorities that are in the draft legislative program, that they've been the priorities across the region in the legislative program for a number of years. They're general statements. They've been morphed over time. They may change in their language. They may change in their emphasis or their priority, but again, all in all have represented the priorities of the region for a number of years and much the way you see them now. They're also broad statements that give some flexibility to be able to oppose or support certain specific pieces of legislation. Since we can't really include in the program a listing of all the specific bills that we expect to see, that we've seen in the past and expect to see again. So those are reflected, those 6 priority areas are reflected in the memo that accompanies the longer program that's in your packet. Also included a 1-page list that highlights the major changes from the current version of the program that are being proposed. And I guess the last thing I would say, you'll note in looking at the priority statements and the other statements, there are a lot of statements that are asking the General Assembly not to do things to us. You know, we sometimes look at this program as being a defense mechanism or a shield, because there are a number of specific proposals that we face every year during the General Assembly that at the local government level we don't necessarily like. So again, there's that flexibility in the broader statements, but also a lot of those things that help us to be able to advocate for those things that we would not like to see. So all of the other localities in the region have approved the program as it is before you. You all are getting the last bite at the apple, and we'll look forward to hopefully your positive approval at some point here this evening.
All right. Thank you.
Now
Danny.
now I'd like to sort of first go over some of the changes that you all have asked for in your position statements and then the individual bills. I won't highlight each one, but there are some things that are very substantive. First, Councilor Galvin has requested state assistance for localities in terms of alternative fuel for mass transit projects. And in the position statement, you'll also see asking for the General Assembly to conduct a study for what's called a tax circuit breaker program, so that if your real estate taxes exceed a certain threshold at a certain income level, the state would give you a refund on your state income tax. Councilor Bellamy had 2 major changes that he asked to be included in your position statements. One includes looking at limited driver's licenses for undocumented individuals. And the other is something that has occurred the past few sessions in Richmond. There have been a number of bills to try to constrict or completely choke off localities' abilities to enact their own ordinances concerning federal immigration policies, and these position statements ask that local autonomy remain when it comes to those issues. Councilor Hill is asking for legislators to give localities the option to regulate the use and disposal of disposable plastic bags. And Mayor Walker, I think, has one of the big ones that we hear almost every meeting, and that is asking our legislators to end the Dillon Rule interpretation and permit localities to have home rule. So those are your highlights and your position statements from the counselors. I did also want to highlight the Human Rights Commission. A couple of things that they're advocating for in your position statements are, first, ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment to the United States Constitution. And second, they are also asking for legislation that promotes equal housing and employment opportunities for all without regard to sexual orientation or gender identity. As for the specific bills that are being requested this year, there are 4 bills that the council is asking for, but wanted to highlight the newest one first, and that is from Mayor Walker, inclusionary zoning. And it's a fairly simple change, but it could be a very big change. And what we ultimately are asking is that the General Assembly includes Charlottesville in the list of localities that includes Albemarle County in having the authority to have a very broad affordable housing program that includes inclusionary zoning as an option for rezonings, which, again, can be a very big step towards grappling with these land use questions when they come to you. And I know constantly, I know last week, hearing the Planning Commission talk about the development over in Belmont, there was a lot of talk about affordable housing. I know coming to this council, there's always a lot of talk about affordable housing when it comes to rezonings, and this could be a really, really useful tool in your toolbox. The other 3 specific bill request, we have a request for Charlottesville this year. I think Councilor Bellamy wanted to change it. Instead of all localities being sort of exempt from the War Memorial Statute legislation, he wanted to sort of tailor the request to make it just that Charlottesville would be exempt from those provisions in the code concerning war memorials. There's also public safety bills that are being requested. They were the same as last year. We wanted to prohibit burning torches in public places. Also prohibiting certain firearms in public spaces, just like other densely populated localities, including Norfolk, Alexandria, and Virginia Beach, all have this authority. The council is asking the legislature to include Charlottesville in that list. And also the authority to control weapons at public meetings and public buildings. Finally, there is a request for speed cameras, and that would allow localities, a specific request for a bill to allow localities to deploy automated speed cameras. This was on the council's legislative agenda last year. And I thought it would be, I'm sorry.
Mr. Blair, so that's already allowed. It would add us to that list. Is that how it would work? Because they have that in a bunch of, in Falls Church City. They've got this right now. I think.
I'm not aware of that in Falls Church. I think this is a broad request to allow all local governments, but it could be that you would like to tailor it to Charlottesville?
Am I mistaken? Is that,
This is
they
the
don't
same
have
one
them
that
in
Cree
other-
Deeds, Senator
is the
Deeds
same
put
one.
forth last year.
Yes.
I might be mistaken then. I thought, so there are
Yeah.
no other localities in Virginia that currently have speed cameras right now. There were, and then
There
not.
were red light cameras.
The red light
There are-
cameras, that's right.
There were even some in Albemarle
Okay.
County.
Yep, I got it.
Yeah.
Well, we're not talking about them yet, but okay,
Okay.
got it.
What I thought, before we get into the proposed charter amendments, maybe the council would want to look at the legislative package itself and vote on it, or make any amendments, and then we'll get into the specific charter amendments, because they would require a public hearing at your next
Thank
meeting.
you. I think that's, it sounds like, I have another point of order question. Do we need to vote separately on the, Mr. Blount's regional legislative packet, separate from the city's legislative packet, or do we vote on them together?
You could vote on either way, but probably preferable to just do a TJPDC vote and then a city vote.
Okay. Well, I move that we adopt the TJPDC legislative packet.
Second. And vote. All right, that carries 5-0. Is there a motion?
I move that we adopt the city council legislative position statements and requested bills as put forth by our attorney, John Blair.
Second.
I mean, I'd like to make a comment, about, and I'm sure maybe others would. So as last year, I don't want to argue against it strenuously, but I don't support the speed cameras part of this. I will vote for the whole package. I don't want to vote against it just because of that, unless there's support to take it out. I am concerned about the automation of law enforcement. I'm concerned about putting in the hands of robots, basically, some part of law enforcement. It's kind of a philosophical debate, but it's not philosophical once you talk to people or you know people who've been caught up in these things. I had, everybody's experience is personal. I had an experience where I got a speed camera ticket in Washington, and I was lucky enough, sophisticated enough, I guess, to get out of it because it had caught me and another car in the same frame, and I was able to, and I believed that it was the case, that the other car had been speeding, not me, and there are technical things that are difficult. I also one time got pulled over by a license plate reader that had confused my license plate with somebody else's because mine had a space between two letters and somebody else's didn't. So I was pulled over and, exposed to a cop looking into my front seat. And I'm a white guy, so it's a very different, if you think about how I feel when this sort of thing happens, with the privileges that we have. And I do worry about shifting over law enforcement to robots and machines. I fret about it, although I think there are lots of good arguments on the other side. So I'm not ready to do it yet, and I have those concerns.
If I might add, though, that this is just to give us the authority. It
Got it.
still is not the ordinance that we would have to write locally, so we're not
Understood.
anywhere near that yet. This is just giving local autonomy.
Understood.
And I, too, support just 1, 2, and 4. Any other comment?
Are there any others who do not support 3?
All right. Is there a motion?
I seconded it, so.
Okay. And vote. All right.
Okay. And now we move on. Just want to clarify why these are separate from your legislative package tonight. Charter amendments, there are 2 proposed. Charter amendments going through the legislative process as opposed to a voter referendum require a public hearing. And so tonight, I thought the council could take each of these proposed charter amendments and decide whether it wants to authorize a public hearing at your December 3rd meeting. The first charter amendment I will discuss, and I do want to make one other comment. I think, as all of you know, the charter is severely outdated throughout the entire document. It needs an enormous amount of cleanup. There are, for instance, gender-specific terms, there are outdated code references, there are just a number of aspects of the charter that haven't been updated for decades, and they do need some updating, and it's my hope that next year our office, the city attorney's office, can present to you all sort of an updated charter that just for cleanup, not substantive, but just to get the references cleaned up so that they reflect next year 2019 rather than the 1940s or 1970s when there were a lot of amendments made. But what you'll see tonight on the 2 charter amendments that were proposed, when they did in fact address a section, I just decided to also put that cleanup language in the charter portion that's proposed to be amended. And so I'll walk you through that. The first amendment tonight would be Councilor Bellamy's. He had asked that Charlottesville voters get to elect the mayor directly. And this is very similar to Roanoke, Virginia, the city of Roanoke. they have, in effect, an elected mayor. But just like Charlottesville, the mayor does not have any additional powers. However, the mayor is directly elected by the voters. You might ask, how does that work? In Roanoke's charter and in this proposed charter amendment, an individual could not run for mayor and council at the same time. So there is a separate ballot for mayor when you elect the city council in Roanoke every 4 years. And individuals can only run for mayor and they cannot, yes ma'am.
Just want to clarify for my own
Yes.
head here. Do they have all their counselors run at the same time, however, or are they staggered like we are?
No, they're staggered.
Okay, so they only have one cycle that allows for those folks to get into that
Right,
seat.
right. They elect a mayor and I believe 3 councilors one cycle, and then 2 years later, they elect 3 more councilors.
So, I'm sorry, Mr. Blair.
Do you?
You
No,
can finish,
yeah.
sorry. We'll let you
No,
finish.
no, I was gonna say, I think, where I believe Vice Mayor Hill is getting to, which I would be open to a friendly amendment if my colleagues wanted, only for the mayor position to be elected every 2 years. I didn't know if that's where you were going, and I may be speaking ahead. But I know we did see an email like that, and I had some conversation with some people, which I'm open to. I mean, the mayor only being in 2 years like we have it now, I just want it to be elected for people to be able to choose their own mayor.
Well, then, there's 2 different terms.
Right.
Correct.
I'm not-
Again, we don't have to go that route. I thought that's what Ms.
Yeah.
Hill was saying, but I could be wrong.
Yep, that's one of the things I was
Okay.
trying to understand is how that works for them. There's different cycles.
Like, because as Mr. Blair said, though, that they, like in Roanoke and in other cities who have this weak elected mayor, it's 4 years. So they are the mayor for 4 years.
Also wanted to flesh out a few more of the details on Councilor Bellamy's proposal. His proposal, also the vice mayor, would be the individual every 2 years who receives the most votes for the council elections. So you'd have, theoretically, if this were enacted by the Assembly in 2019, there would be a mayor elected and there would be 2 councilors elected at the same time. Whichever one of those individuals was elected to council with the most votes would automatically be the vice mayor. Then in 2021, there would be another election for 2 more city councilors. Whichever individual received the most votes in that election would then be the vice mayor for 2 years. But again, everybody, including the mayor, all of the individuals are still city councilors with 1 vote.
Correct.
The other thing, as part of what I mentioned, the cleanup portion, one of Councilor Bellamy's sections that needed to be amended also included the special election process and what would happen if somebody were to resign from council. Currently, the city charter, even though it isn't in conformity with state law, says an individual, actually, I believe the council has to elect an individual or appoint an individual to that seat at its next meeting, which
Yeah.
I'm
it's tough.
sort of, that could be a very odd
It's tough.
process, but the
Right.
state law, which I've reflected in the charter amendment, says that the council has 45 days to appoint an individual to that seat. So, again, that's more technical. It's not related directly to his charter amendment, but since it was touching on a section that had to be amended, I just put that in there to conform that part of the charter to state law.
Are there other models that you are aware of relative to I'm a firm believer that I really want to give more input from the community on some of these decisions. But at the same time, I think that there's a lot of limitations to this Roanoke approach. I'm just curious, are there other things that you've looked at that have more flexibility? I mean, for example, like that if a mayor is being selected, that all 5 councilors can be considered for that role at any election cycle, regardless of kind of where they. The staggering just seems to be kind of limiting because I know like there was a lot of criticism when the two of us as new people were the ones that came in and took these roles, and in this case, depending on who wants to be reelected or not, so let's just say that there was all new people looking at it again, you'd be by default two new people will be in those leadership roles again in the future. There's a high probability of that without really considering where some of that experience is coming from. And obviously we were in that case, so we're not excluding ourselves. I'm just saying that that's just a consideration, especially when I think about just the dynamics. I think, and I understand what the public, and I really appreciate, and I really just first and foremost just think we need to have more of a discussion about this. I think right now for me tonight to say, yes, I want to put this specific initiative, this specific approach forward to a public hearing, I just think there's so much more robust discussion to be had, not only on this, but also on like, is there a award system? That seems like that was of interest. The last time we talked about this as a group, I just felt like there was a lot of other facets that were raised beyond just this one specific thing. And I want that to be more of a more robust conversation that we can all really engage meaningfully with the public, because ultimately it really should be up to the public to decide the direction that we go. And I feel like this is a very prescriptive approach that just gives me a lot of pause just in terms of the ability for, anyone on council to kind of get into the mix here and how that will kind of play out over time.
So if I may just briefly in response to that, Ms. Hill, I think one thing to keep in mind is that there's going to be people who offer criticism no matter what. And to be honest, I think that you and Mayor Walker have done a phenomenal job since y'all have come on, especially with a lot of the extra tasks that you have taken on. So I don't know if necessarily experience on council. Well, I do think it plays a role. If a council of 5 individuals are working together, we can get to where we need to be, as we've collectively done, contrary to I think what some people think. We do work together in a variety of different ways. Secondly, when I initially sent the stuff to Mr. Blair, while a large portion of it was the Roanoke model, some of it had the Norfolk model in it, which is somewhat similar to Roanoke, but a little different. But this is the Roanoke model, in my opinion, is probably one of the most comprehensive, weak mayor models that they have, that allows citizens to still be able to provide their input in regards to who they want to see at the top of leadership, while still maintaining a level of equivalence amongst the 5 councilors. But if it would make you and the colleagues feel better with, as Mr. Blair alluded to earlier, having a public hearing at the December 3rd meeting and hearing from more members of the public, or if you have some suggestions, I'm open to amending or, taking a little bit more time with it. I just think that we should move forward, but I'm open to
And I think part
listening.
of it is just the time, because right now it's proposing that it would be for this next election. And let's be honest, there should be some people declaring that they want to participate in this election as soon as a few weeks from now. And so I'm just not sure of the timing of how all of that would work. And my other main concern is, let's be honest, we haven't exactly always rolled out we're not rolling out the welcome mat for people to want to kind of step into this role. I think it's a big task for someone to want to come in and join us up here at this stage in our community. And my concern is if we're having 2 kind of competing seats, being that we could have a couple strong people that want to be the mayor, and I really respect that people want to step up and do that. But if there's only one of them can go and then the other person can't succeed in a council seat, are we really losing out on some really great talent because we're only allowing one person through that process where it's not a default to go into a councilor seat? And so and that's why I was asking about other models, because I just feel like this is a little more restrictive than I would want us to be. If people want to step up and into this role, I want to give them as much of an opportunity to succeed in becoming a counselor, because at the end of the day, like we said, the mayor really doesn't have any additional power, but it is, the leader of this group. And
That's what they know that going into it. You kind of sign up for, if you're a current counselor, you run for mayor, you know that you may win, you may lose. That's also kind of how
I'm just
life
thinking even
works.
about the people that are out there considering coming in as new
Or
folks.
even the people coming in. If they choose to run for mayor and not counselor, and they lose,
Yeah.
then that's what they chose to do.
Mayor Walker, can I ask a question? So, Councilor Bellamy, can you
Yes, ma'am.
explain to me why you think this is important to do?
Sure. So a couple of reasons. One, I think we've heard from the community. Well, let me not say we. speak for myself. I've heard a great deal from the community in regards to when it comes down to leadership. I'm asked this question all the time. Why can't we elect or vote for our own mayor? Or are we going to be able to vote for who the mayor is? Or why did this decision happen or that decision happen? And I think, again, this just allows for the public to be able to be included in the process of the selection of the leadership of their local government. I think when we as 5 individuals are elected as city councilors, and then we as the only 5 people decide who's going to be the mayor or the vice mayor, it kind of takes a little bit away from the citizens. And I want them to be, personally, I would like for them to have a little bit more skin in the game when it comes to picking their leadership. I think that the model that we've had personally is a little outdated because I think a more innovative way, and just when we talk about democracy, is allowing people to choose, allowing the citizens to choose their own leadership, opposed to us doing so.
But if I may ask, though,
Yes, sure.
the mayor has no more power than a councilor. So
Agreed.
it's isn't it also kind of misleading to the public that the public is believing they're electing a leader of the community when it's not? This is a leader of the council to run a meeting.
Yeah. So
So
allow
I don't
the-
understand what are you gaining when the power of the mayor isn't changed? It only gives an illusion of power.
Well, I do think that I think our mayor has a little bit more. I think we're 5 equals, but you're electing the chair of the meeting. And when it comes to deciding what goes on the agenda, what doesn't go on the agenda, kind of curving the direction and the conversations that we have up here, I think is important. And let's allow the public to be able to choose who they want to be able to do those things. I don't think in my personal opinion, it hurts us for allow the people to decide who's going to be the chair of this body. Let them pick, opposed to us.
Do you mind if I not so much questions for Mr. Bellamy, just a couple of comments.
Sure.
When this last came up, I was actually trying to find the story about it. When this last came up, we had a preliminary conversation up here, and we had an interesting discussion, but a lot of consensus that whatever we might do here, we would want a lot of community engagement, because, and there was agreement only on that, because there were a lot of different ways that we could go about this sort of dramatic reform. And then if you think about, look at the community engagement we just did about the new names for the parks. That involved, I think, multiple surveys. It involved multiple conversations here. It went over a period of months. People really got situated and comfortable, I think, as well as we kind of do this sort of thing. And this would be for something that touches everybody in the community, and that would be a structural reform that would go on for a very long time. And we have not even scratched the surface of that kind of community engagement, thinking about a range of different options to address whatever concerns there are about the form of government. So, and I floated a couple before, and we didn't really even get far down the road of those. I don't know what our process would be for which ones make it into the gate of what we do our community engagement about, but one of them, I'll just say 2 specific ones here. One would be electing the city manager, which they do in Maryland, and that would give members of the community a voice in deciding the most powerful part of the community, the most powerful staffer. Now, Mayor Walker raised a good question during our very brief discussion then, which is, well, would that mean they would have to be a member of the relatively small city of Charlottesville to stand for office? Good question. Don't know what the models are dealing with in Maryland. Maybe there's not support of 3 to get that idea into the final discussion, but to me, it's, as we're chewing over what we've learned about the shortcomings of this form of government, one of them is that the people don't have a direct voice over the CEO of the government, and they do that in other states. And so that is one thought. Another one would be to retitle the mayor. One of the things that I learned, and that I think the communities are going through, is the title is confusing because people think the mayor is a chief executive, as in big urban cities like Philadelphia or Chicago or New York, and they're not. They're the chair of the board. In counties, the mayor is called the chair. So Albemarle County has a mayor, but it's the chair of the board. They have a similar form of government as we do. So if you you know, for discussion purposes, there may not be sufficient support for this among my colleagues, among the public, but these are the sorts of things that you would go through in a thoughtful process like we went through for the names of the parks, which I think is less, you know, consequential in terms of how the government is actually running, how are we engaging with the people running the government on a going basis for years and years and years. So I think that if we do what we said we did the last time this came up, which is like, let's do real community engagement about this. Let's have a couple town halls about it. Let's have a work session in our meeting where we are prepared to you know, elected officials submit those ideas that we would like to talk over. Let's put some time into it. Let's come up with the best alternatives. Let's look at examples. Let's have a brief here in our book that we really think about, and then let's see what the public says. We have gotten very little feedback from the public about this. I mean, this just came up the last week. It's not like there's a, you know, so I appreciate a lot Councilor Bellamy bringing this up. I've talked about it, but I don't think that we're doing the process that there was a lot of interest in the last time this came up here.
And I remember us
But
talking
we
about,
also could at least hear what the public had to say in a public hearing,
Right.
instead of us delaying it another, because then it wouldn't be a possibility until, what, 2021?
2021, yes.
Well, there was time to do this
Yeah,
summer.
I mean, and we were originally going to have a work session on this. I don't know what happened to that idea. Because this is
Yeah.
premature to come up with to submit a plan for this legislative
think
package.
But
It's
again, we
premature.
are
It's-
saying
For
the,
specific, when we haven't done the engagement, we don't know what the
We've been
public
talking
feels
about
like.
this for,
but still having a public hearing and hearing what the public has to say on the 3rd would not push this further along, besides that we would have the first stage of
I mean,
public
that's
engagement
true.
that we are saying that we
It
would
doesn't
want.
necessarily have to go into the legislative packet.
but my question is that public hearing, I don't want it to be just only about this one option. I want it to be more open than
Yeah.
that. I want to have that be a more robust conversation that goes even beyond elected mayor to like the ward system, some of the other things that we heard come
But
up.
we've had citizens bring these
Several
up before,
times.
so
Right, but this is only addressing one facet of it, in my opinion. And it's pretty fast.
well, we could have, I mean, if you guys wanted, so one, the public elected us to be able to make decisions. So that's the first part. When it comes to us making decisions, we have to bring forth ideas. If we felt as if we wanted to include the ward system or we wanted to include any of those other items, I don't understand why didn't any of you say to put that into the packet?
I
I literally
didn't-
brought this up like 2 or 3 months ago formally, and we've been talking about it for much longer than that. It's like,
I did
just-
not realize the
this-
scope of the packet was going to be those changes because we had agreed at this dais to have a more open discussion around these things. I honestly, until you put it forward, I didn't even think that was in the scope of what we were being asked to provide to the city attorney's office.
So that's valid, but I think Mr. Blair asked us all for what would we like in the packet. That was 6 to 8 weeks ago, or at least a month ago. So I mean, if you all and you all saw the formal request then, it's like I hear the caution for like, let's make sure we cook the turkey the right way, but let's not also be so reluctant to change. I've given a lot of turkeys this weekend, so I got turkeys on my mind. But let's not like allow that to prolong us from creating change. I mean, change can be scary in some regards, but I think this is something that we've heard from a lot of people that they want, and let's give them the opportunity. We can make it public right now on our next meeting on December 3rd, you said? I'm sorry, I don't have the dates in front of me.
December 3rd.
December 3rd, come voice your opinion and we can make a decision. I mean, that's what we're here for, to make decisions.
Well, again, Mr. Bellamy.
Yes, ma'am.
A member of the public called me today about this and said, was there a survey done? There wasn't a survey done about this. No one knows what so again, I totally understand the importance of making decisions. We have to make decisions, and we're always getting dinged for making decisions, one way or the other.
Right.
50% of the people are happy, 50% aren't. But I'm just not prepared to make this as a legislative request because it is one option of possibly many. I really thought we were going to have a work session on this and discuss it in a much more complete picture that we could have included the ward system discussion. And now we have, I'm afraid, public fatigue with engagement. We've got the community, the comprehensive plan update, we've got a city manager search. The public has just done a survey on that one, and now we're going to be bringing up restructuring our government structure. In fact,
It's engagement.
so, but I think timing matters when we do it. And so my hope is that we would have a work session on this in the early spring and do it methodically.
For 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand the rush.
Well, I'm just trying to understand even the feasibility that we would get, the feedback that we feel comfortable we would need on December 3rd, and then it has to be.
We may not, we don't know what we'll hear on December 3rd, but I think that being open to hearing it, since we're saying that that's what we want.
I'm fine. I'm so open to hear. I'm just saying, I can't, it would be a real stretch for me to see that I'm gonna be able to get behind one proposal in 2 weeks' time. I'm happy to hear from the public on that date. I'm just wanting to manage expectations for my colleagues about how I feel.
I just don't get, like, if we had these issues, why didn't anybody, this has been up amongst us for,
Because this is the first time we've had to talk about it publicly.
yeah, but we could have, I mean,
Wes, we've
we
been
all
doing
could
a
have
lot of
said-
things, okay? We've been
We
doing
all have.
a lot of
We
things.
literally all have been doing a lot of things, but we could have said that, well, let's include that, or like, let's talk about this, or hey, can you add this? An email takes like 5 minutes. I'm just a little perplexed that I'm hearing this now, and maybe we need to talk about this, maybe we need to add that. I respect it. I'm just voicing my opinion.
I just thought when we were up here the last time we had this topic come up, that we did agree to having more of a work session type of conversation, and then an engagement process that would follow, because this is just one facet of many that we were hearing from the public that mattered to them. Because we have heard some stuff from the public that's just been the tip of the iceberg. And our biggest concern is just the timing of the feasibility of having this happen for anyone who is considering this next election cycle. And when we would find out from the General Assembly, I guess it wouldn't be till February, we would know. I mean, Mr. Blair, do you have thoughts on this?
Well, I was wondering if Mr. Blunt might come up. I think in consideration of Councilor Bellamy's proposal wanting to take effect in 2019, this would probably need to be special legislation in terms of the charter amendment and asking that it become effective on the date if it were signed by the governor. Is that?
Yeah, from a process standpoint, charter change bills are required to be introduced on the first day, their first day legislation, which is January the 8th, 9th, I believe. This is the short legislative session, 46 days, which means by the end of February, we're done with everything. Charter bills require a 2/3 vote majority of each chamber. I think to have an emergency clause put on a bill so that it takes effect upon the governor's signature as opposed to July 1st, I believe is a 4/5 vote.
Oh, wow.
So be effective July 1st?
To be effective on the date the governor signs it as opposed to July 1st,
Oh, I
which is
see.
typically when bills that are enacted by the General Assembly take effect.
And Mr. Bellamy, I have an answer to your question. I've been trying to think about the last few months. I think that, at least speaking for myself, what happens, I think it was July that we talked about it, is we became very focused on the new city manager and the city manager search and some changes within there. So I think that in terms of my bandwidth, for my capacity for thinking about big governmental change, that's where all of it went. And we had a very interesting discussion up here. I did not, I'm not very often making agenda requests, but the agenda is made, by the city manager usually with the mayor, and we do requests and you lobby for it. But I think that just being honest, that I talked up here with detail about how I thought this was a really good discussion for the step. But I think it begins with the discussion. So however it ended up that we end up here with just one idea being proposed for one bill, to me, I wish it weren't here. I think that it's a great time to have a work session where we talk about, where we get everything off our chest and we start talking about, hey, if I just gave two, I'd like to know what people think about those. I'd like to have another, look at the examples out there. This is a really, you've pushed one idea here based on Roanoke, get it, but it's, however it all happened, that's where we are right now, and I just think it's one idea and it's not ready to be the piece of legislation that we asked for. I would like the public hearing, I'd like the public hearing to happen during a work session that we go do. If that could happen next council meeting, but I think that's unlikely.
So, if I can, so you're thinking about the work session being in these chambers or a work session being?
Yeah,
in
like,
another-
like we used to do work
Zoom.
sessions. So I think this would be fitting for, when we started moving the work sessions from Thursday under the, whether they're, I think it's sort of still in the new rules. The point was you can carve out real time on Tuesday night where the whole public can watch and you really openly, and it's not on Robert's rules, we just chew over and we ask questions and it's open. That would be an interesting work session for the public to watch, and it's an important topic. We could also do it in city space, but I guess that was the thought.
Yeah, I just didn't know if it was on Monday, a first or third Monday, or a separate
Monday,
day.
I'm sorry, I meant Monday, yeah. I meant during a regular council
Yeah.
meeting.
If we're gonna have that kind of discussion in 2 weeks, I would like to, I personally would have to spend some time looking at a lot of
don't
other
think-
options, because I just think that this has to be a much broader conversation. I would like to hear from people in the community about the types, I mean, we have some of that from the July meeting, I will go back to those minutes and remind myself, but I feel like it's a tall order for the next 2 weeks. There's a lot going on right now. I'm just recognizing my own capacity.
And it's typical that work sessions don't result in action. They're taking in information that then gives staff direction to create a more formal resolution or ordinance. That's how they're typically done. So, I don't think this is ready for action.
Okay. It's like, I don't know.
Where it's ready, we can discuss it amongst other things, it sounds like.
It's like when it's time for us to make decisions, sometimes we have to wait and let's talk to hear the same thing that
Yeah, but-
we know people are going to say.
This is,
But okay, I'm fine if y'all want to wait. So does this mean we're going to put it on the December 3rd agenda, like Mr. Signal was just saying? mean-
December 3rd is packed,
Sure, we could.
but that would be a work session?
but I'm just saying, I'm just
not
telling you,
involved in it, I'm just-
I
I
want
don't
to
know.
be able to think, personally, I want to be able to go and evaluate all the other ways that this is done. Like, I want to do the research, and if I have a timeline of when we're going to talk about it, I'll prepare for it. But honestly, I really wasn't prepared until I got my agenda packet for both of these charter amendments to be here with this decision point being made right now. And I'm struggling with that and not having that kind of headlight.
But I am interested in hearing from the public. So if nothing else happens, because you all will
maybe
be able
let-
to decide that, we still could hear.
But does it have to be about this specific
We
amendment,
could
or
do
can
a
it be more
special-
broadly?
Well, Mayor Walker, we could do, you could set in just a special public hearing on that topic in an upcoming meeting. And just, we hear from the public on governmental reform and just.
And they've
that
been
we've done
sending
that
their
before.
comments in,
Yeah.
over the
I mean, a
past few
handful.
days too. But, yeah, we could still hear the direction over the next 2 weeks. I'm sure people are paying very close attention so that they will start chiming in. And we can just hear the direction that they, the people who, voice their concerns. We also have to just weigh and look at who we've heard from and who we haven't heard from.
Exactly.
Again, and even some of the other groups that have come forth before and talked about what they had hoped would be proposed before, like the ward system. We have a city that when you're talking about, displacement, there's necessarily no segment of the community that that probably fits into, like they were thinking of when they first proposed the ward system. We also have to think about, which is one reason that I haven't really been, either way, I support this, but we have to think about who typically has been elected in Charlottesville, who typically has been on council and who has been, mayor. And this doesn't necessarily fix that because you just have more of our current population voting for the elected officials. So I think because of the conditions that we have produced, none of this is necessarily the fix that we think that that it's going to have. I responded to a Facebook post today and said, I'm sure that mayor will be white again soon. You can calm down, right? That was what I said to this person who was not being very nice on their Facebook post. This isn't about me. I'm strong in any position that I am in, and I don't need a title of any sort to be that for me. But what people are thinking when you're talking about these type of changes and where we are as a city, and we have to acknowledge that and how it's really preventing really any progress. So who's likely to be elected in a elected mayor position? We'll probably end up at the same place, that we normally end up, minus, my current place.
If I could add just one aspect to this, Councilor Bellamy has a charter proposal, and if the council wants to advance it, you can vote to hold a public hearing on December 3rd. That does not obligate the council to, in fact, vote to send this on as a request to your legislators. The other aspect that's been talked about tonight, and I don't see that there'd be anything that would prohibit, you can have your public hearing on Councilor Bellamy's charter proposal for the weak elected mayor, and also just have a general public hearing about the mayor, the form of government you want to take, just the topics of the mayor, the council itself.
But Mr. Blair, what I would say is that the cart is before the horse, because setting even one bill up for a public hearing suggests that there are 3 strong council votes for that bill. Otherwise, why would you put the council through that exercise? So we're having the right discussion now. That's true, that could technically happen, but I think there are risks to that. Now, if there are 3 votes for us, for council supporting that bill, then we should put, but I can't think of a precedent where we've had, we could just do an open hearing on a topic that's kind of that's the general topic, but I can't think of one where we would going into it not being sure that there's support for that one idea. That would be a strange precedent to set, because it just would.
Okay, so I think we're at is there a motion?
So, is there a motion to at least have the public hearing about this on December 3rd? Or I'd like to make that motion. Is there support for that?
Is it about that specific bill or about the general topic of government change, government structural change?
Which would make you more comfortable, the general topic?
I think that's generally speaking.
Cool.
But I do want to let you know that in effect, this proposal,
It dies.
it dies.
Yeah,
If
it's
that's-
dead.
And in which case, then there is no great
Why?
rush.
Because that's past the pre-filing? or
Right.
what is it?
Right.
Right.
But
So
can't
we-
a bill can be introduced after December 3rd? It can be introduced
It
after
can be-
December 3rd.
December 3rd at 5 p.m. is the deadline for legislators to submit requests for drafts of bills that would be pre-filed,
Right.
which is the first day legislation. Again, there's also the requirement that a charter change be introduced on the first day.
It doesn't have to be pre-filed, though. It can still be a bill that gets introduced in the General Assembly past December, and Mr. Bellamy, the shoe is also on the foot. It's not, so yes, nobody here did drive
But he
forward.
wasn't finished.
Well, okay.
The legislators also, you should know, have a limit on the number of bills that they can introduce in this short session. For the House of Delegates, that's 15. For members of the Senate, it's 25. So your legislators are going through the process now of deciding which drafts they want to request and what their legislative initiatives and agenda is going to be. So time really is a critical piece of this at this point in time.
So may I ask this question? If we were to present this to, if Mr. Dees or Mr. Toscano were to present this to allow us, or to grant us the authority to be able to change our charter to as proposed. It doesn't mean we have to do it, but are you guys amicable to explore, or at least allowing us to present it so that we can change it?
You already have the authority to change your charter.
But you have to go through this process.
Yeah, but you have to
through
go.
this process.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, maybe
I don't know that doesn't get you anywhere.
doesn't get us. All right. I was just trying to think of. I mean, I'm one who likes change, but
I love change. I just feel like in a normal year, and Mr. Blair, I guess you've had some prior experience. We're pretty far along anyway in general for even getting this legislative packet together. I mean, usually this would be done even in the summertime, and so I just feel like we're just
we
not.
always do it.
But
30 years
we
I've been on
have
council.
acknowledged that we'll do it earlier,
Right.
starting
Yeah,
next
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
year.
I want to be more proactive. I don't want to feel rushed through something that I think is really important and clearly the public cares about.
Okay, so is there a motion?
I've made one.
Is there a second?
But what is the motion?
Yeah.
What was
For
it?
us to have the
public
open,
hearing
public
on
hearing
this-
on December 3rd about
On this
the
proposal.
topic of the charter change for
Of
the
this
position of
specific
mayor.
charter change.
We can make it open to the general topic of the charter change of elected and appointed mayor. And that
So-
allows us to be able to hear from the public about different forms of government as well.
And I go back to my question, and I guess maybe Ms. Galvin asked it. If we are kind of stalling this specific initiative, what is the motivation for having to do it in 2 weeks?
Yeah,
Just because I would like to
there-
give myself more
Yeah,
time to
there's
do the
no
research
need
at
for it
this
in 2
point.
weeks.
If we're really going to have that robust conversation and engage the public, I want to look at a lot of different options and work with staff to like summarize some different decision making points. I just don't want to look at one specific thing.
Okay, so there's a motion, there's a second, I second it. Any further discussion? All right. So vote. All right. It is 3-2-3. All right,
Okay.
next.
And there is another charter amendment proposal proposed by Mayor Walker. And Mayor Walker's charter proposal looks at the compensation of city councilors and the mayor. And her particular proposal would it would set it would authorize that the council could set its salary at 1/5 of the city manager's salary, and the mayor would earn an additional 20% compensation compared to their colleagues on the city council.
Some questions came up today. When is the earliest this could, I was reading through the state kind of dictates that we
Right.
could not do this for this current council.
Right, the state code indicates, even if the charter was amended for the salary increase, that it requires that a council enact a salary increase at least 4 months before the next general election for city councilors, and then the actual salary increase would not take effect until January 1 after those council elections, per state law.
Discussion.
I certainly understand the objective here in that we have an environment that, where we're at in terms of the amount of workload that we're putting in and the salary that is here, it makes it really a barrier for a lot of people to get involved in government, and I recognize that tremendously. I think this goes beyond even city council. I think that there are other boards and commissions where we aren't seeing the representation that we want because of the amount of time that's committed. I think first and foremost for me, and I've most recently brought this up as we look to see where we're placing all of our time, because this is a lot of work. I mean, it certainly is a full-time job, and many of us can attribute to that. But how do we recalibrate the scope of our role so that it isn't kind of that level of intensity? Like it is truly a full-time job. And so I'm certainly, my energy wants to be behind really trying to understand where are there opportunities for us to make this role more manageable for many in our population. But at the same time, I am very much open to us talking about this. We heard from a lot of people in the public about it being pegged to the city manager's salary, because obviously council determines that salary, and that's an adjustment. I think it's also hard for accountability because, over the years as I've watched counselors, there are disparities across counselors in terms of the time that any one of us puts into it based on, what our own objectives are and our own motives. I also consider staff and their own salaries relative to what we're talking about in terms of dollars, because we are here in a public servant role, and to look at some of us, if we were to be at a position salary that's even higher than many of our staff, it's a very uncomfortable position, I think, to be in. And so I'm just interested, is there more dynamic approaches that we could take without pigeonholing ourselves? But I want to understand, what can we do to really address the need that I really feel like is the foundation of this, is how do we get it that more people can be involved in our local government in this capacity, and that this is not a barrier to entry, but at the same time, just recognizing that the role that we are serving as public servants, and how we make this job more manageable. So that's kind of the balance I'm trying to look at here.
And I'll say that for several, at least from what I know personally, council cycles, that hasn't been, it has been this level of intensity for a while. So to say that we'll look at that and work on it and it'll somehow die down is one thing. We looked at, was it only one other, was it Alexandria?
Alexandria doesn't set a limit on council compensation.
What is their council compensation?
30.
I do not know. I can look that up right now.
Yeah, I think it's in the low.
40 for the mayor.
And you clarified for this for me,
The districts are a lot
and some people have brought it up. We are at the maximum what the state kind of guides us on, but that our charter can override that guidance.
Right, basically, pursuant to your charter can, in certain limited circumstances, override state law. And if you don't see the words "notwithstanding general law" in a state or notwithstanding a special act or charter provision, then a charter provision can override a state law. Again, as Mr. Blunt has explained, charter amendments do have quite a few procedural requirements, 2/3 vote compared to bare majority in both houses of the General Assembly. But yes, a charter amendment, I believe it's 15.2-101, permits the charter to control over state law.
Mayor Walker, to Vice Mayor Hill's comments about making it more manageable, that was the whole argument for the Office of Counsel. We all knew that we were working 40 to 60 hours a week, that we were getting paid supposedly for 20 hours a week. So that's why this council voted to go to the upper limit that was allowed by the Virginia Code, which gave the councilors $18,000 and the mayor $22,000, and that getting a policy analyst to do the research that we are all currently doing our own, and to get a community outreach coordinator to assist us with our communications, and then the assistant clerk, and then a clerk of council / chief of staff to basically manage everything that we are currently doing now. The work that you're doing and the mayor's doing with regards to the city manager search should be done by our chief of staff, clerk of council, period.
Yeah, but it's not just those positions. I mean, even when Paige was here, it was still.
But yeah, we never got to the point where we hired the policy analyst. And that is an enormous amount of work to do all the effort to go into getting the policy, which is the function of this body, this legislative body, is to do policy.
But we know that we live in a locality that has a lot of citizen engagement and demands a lot of counsel. And so you all are speculating that somehow that's going to change just because if we don't do a charter amendment. So my purpose for proposing this, which a lot of the attention has been on me, and again, I'll say that I know how to get things done. So this isn't necessarily about me. If most people, I work now 40 plus hours, and then I don't even know how many hours that I do for council engagement. Most people cannot do that. They will not do that. If you're talking about diversity amongst council, and for people to be able to say it's a possibility for me to do this and be a part of this, and it's not the same people who have, just because of their income stream, being able to do this, then that is something that we are going to have to look at. This is not the first time this has been talked about. You all brought it up. And you all just went to the max before we got here. For all the public that's concerned about that I'm the person bringing it up, it's been brought up by previous council, and there have been previous council members who wrote into us, chiefly concerned that it's not benefiting me, but that this is something that maybe in the future we definitely should consider. So again, if you're talking about people sitting out there now thinking, can I comfortably run for council, do that job well, take care of my family, and not feel like, feel that it's a possibility, then I would say right now for most people that's not the case.
So I have a couple, yes, sir.
I'm sorry, just for clarification, Alexandria did just vote to raise the council member's salary to $37,500 a year and the mayor to $41,600 a year.
How big is their municipality?
180 or 60.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was going to say about 150,000.
So it's 4 times
somewhere
bigger than
around
us.
there, if I recall correctly.
So, Madam Mayor, I have just a couple thoughts on this. And again, I appreciate Councilor Galvin's background, because that does, we had a discussion about some aspects of this. And I guess the thing that I want to, it's analogous to the conversation we just were having about Dr. Bellamy's proposal, which I just really want to think with our public about what are we trying to do against the government and the laws that we have. So Virginia has a citizen legislative form of government that goes back hundreds of years. This is delegates and senators all get paid on this model. They all get paid a stipend of like $18,000 a year. They're set up so they go to Richmond 2 or 3 months a year. They've got one aide, and it's designed so that they have a job in their community. That's the design, that's the goal. If you look at all the literature on citizen legislator form of governments, now there are some places that don't. California, Massachusetts, a whole bunch of other places have full-time legislatures. There also are some cities that start to make it what you said, so you'd want to be able to live off of the salary of the government, which is a very noble aim.
But this
that's-
isn't even
but if you-
living.
Can you not interrupt me,
But it's
please?
not living.
Do you mind if you don't interrupt me?
But I just want to clarify for the public
Okay,
before
but can I complete
it's
without
not
being interrupted?
living
This is
off
in
of the
violation of our rules.
salary.
Can I please speak?
It's
please?
just not living.
But can I please speak? You can make that point
Okay.
afterward.
I've made it a few times.
Okay.
But go ahead.
I think you did use the word comfortably. So the point is that the government, the model is designed from the progressive era so that you're the board of directors of a government, and the CEO of the government works for you, and you meet part-time. You make policy, and you do budgets, and you do public meetings like this. And that's it. Now, so the problem is when that work starts getting overwhelming. Like when I was mayor, I remember I didn't know the job very well. It was 2 weeks in, we had a snowstorm, and I was up at 3 a.m. writing letters back to all the constituents who were upset that the schools had been shut down for a 4th day. And I was trying to rustle information out. I shouldn't have been doing that. I shouldn't have been doing that. That's when I was overstepping my bounds, and I was getting too operational, and I was getting sort of sucked into the stream of emails that we got. So that was one of many things that started leading me to advocate for professionalizing the office of the council. At that time, we had one clerk. We didn't even have Sarah Brazelton, who came on, who started doing halftime. So the clerk that we had was doing all the receipts and all the lunches and all the, she wasn't even helping with email, much less helping with, and she did scheduling. Whereas like this discussion we just had about surveying all the other forms of government out there in Virginia, that's chief of staff policy
Analyst.
director kind of work. Like we should get, that's not that's not city manager type work. I had to explain this to a reporter recently who was new to town. I said, well, the city manager doesn't tend to work on policy initiatives until the council has gotten a clear majority and a direction of the city manager. So when we start to work on stuff, that's what the office of the council would do. And ironically, the model I started thinking about was Roanoke, because Roanoke has, I think, a 4 or 5 member staff, and they have a professional staff that helps the part-time council, board of directors in a very busy city with a lot of constituent demands, which Charlottesville is, to do those jobs better, but for it still to be a citizen legislator model. So that's the question, and this is all adjustments. We adjusted it before with the salary raise to the cap. And all of this is coming before we're hiring a city manager
Yeah.
who would shift us hopefully to an execution model, when a lot of us the last several years were really working very hard to try and get things done and initiatives off the dime, which is not really what councils are supposed to do. A lot of councils in Virginia, the meetings are like an hour and a half because most things are pretty much worked out, and you're kind of like just working through them. You're explaining to the public. There may be some debate, but in this council, we've really been stuck on a lot of execution things for years and years and years. Our jobs would be a lot easier with a more professional office, and yes, you could increase the salary, but I think there's a philosophical debate here about does it become somebody's primary job by design, and that would contradict the model that we have everywhere else and in the Virginia legislature, although it would match the model we have in a lot of other cities around the country in different states with different models. So it doesn't mean we couldn't do it, but I want to have the debate and have a very rich discussion with the public before we would make a decision. This very long-winded comment being part of that.
I just feel like, I
So
appreciate.
can I just
Yeah, go ahead.
comment real quick on my choice of word, comfortably? If you've been following the city's area median income, then you know that the proposal is still very low income. So no one in Charlottesville is going to be able to survive off the proposal that I put forth, because it's still, according to our AMI, low income. So it's not medium income. It's not our area median income is $89,600 a year. This proposal is nowhere near that. It's in the upper 30s, 37,800. So that's still for the city of Charlottesville, low income. No one would be able to survive here off of that. So I just wanted to clear that point up.
The one point I'd like to make about it is the concern that I've heard from others, and I have myself, about it being pegged to the city manager's salary. If there was some other way to peg it, I mean, population made sense, but pegging it to the city manager's salary builds in an incentive to have hefty salaries for the city manager, and of which we'd get a percentage of. So I don't think that's the right incentive, and we make those decisions on city manager salaries in closed session, so there is no transparency with that. That is a major concern for me.
Didn't we, let me see. We had a discussion surrounding the transparency piece when we were talking, didn't we? I don't remember exactly what it was, about the city manager salary and capping.
Well,
And
and it's also fair to say that the salary itself is clearly all government employees in Virginia who make over $10,000 a year. Their salaries are to be released pursuant to FOIA. So-
Right, but still, the decision was made as to how do you base that 20%, and it's based on a salary that this council sets for its chief executive.
Oh, sure, but I mean, to Mayor Walker's point about the transparency on the salary itself, that
Yeah,
number
eventually it'd be
is-
known, but after the fact.
all right, are there any other comments?
I feel like, to a certain extent, as we all know, the amount of work in which we currently put in to being on council is nowhere near what we're being compensated for. I think we all can agree to that. When you look at, even if not just for this council, for individuals moving forward who are looking to join council, if we want a diverse group of individuals from a variety of different pockets within our community who have a variety of different experiences, we're going to have to do something different in terms of the compensation, because currently it's almost impossible. And to your point, Mr. Signer, the systems have been set up in regards for individuals who serve in the General Assembly, who serve in other jurisdictions throughout the state. Those systems were set up mostly for, I mean, if we're being honest, white men who had business ties and who could afford to serve in these spaces. Currently, the systems still, to a certain extent, are for the more affluent. I mean, not even to a certain extent, these systems are for the more affluent. I don't know many individuals, and I mean, sometimes I'm amazed with how Mayor Walker pulls it off, but many individuals who work in certain jobs who may not pay a living wage, or who may not allow them sick leave or time off to be able to come to the meetings that we have in the middle of the day, or the work sessions that we have that can go on for hours and hours, or just the regular community and public engagement that's normally required just to do a good job at this job. How can you afford to be able to take care of your family and serve your city? And I don't think it should be an either or. It shouldn't be whether a decision has to be made for an individual to decide to serve their city in this capacity, or just not do so because their job won't allow them to. I don't think that's fair. And just because that's how it is in other places throughout the Commonwealth doesn't mean we have to be that way. I pride myself on being a counselor in Charlottesville because we don't do things the way that others do.
But Mr. Bellamy, this proposal wouldn't solve that problem. This would be $40,000 in a city that costs, I mean, that's what, I don't think we're really talking about what the ultimate aims of this are. This would
Okay.
not make it so that somebody could, that this would, as Mayor Walker said, it would still, in an area where the median income is substantially above this, it wouldn't actually solve that. So, I don't know.
And I just wish there was like an option like there is with progressive taxes. I wish there was a way for us to do this more equitably so that we can address this need to open the door for more people to step in. I'm just not sure what flexibility we have to be more nimble. Because again, I share, as I mentioned before, I just having this tied to the city manager's salary as even like a top point, just as I struggle with just that, even that language alone with this specific thing. But I am certainly open and interested in understanding what tools we can put in place to allow this. And again, I think it's beyond our city council. Like, what are other volunteer boards and commissions that we have? This has come up before. Like, the compensation's a piece of that because they are completely volunteer. They don't get paid anything, and that's a big inhibitor for some people to get involved civically. And so, I just don't know where we go from here with this specifically. But I do have concerns with just the specific wording here, and it sounds like this is what's being presented, and this is what we're.
So if it wasn't tied to the city manager's contract, would we look at it differently, or would that make us more amenable to exploring this, or asking the General Assembly to grant us these powers? Or authority, rather, excuse me.
So if I have a point of order, then a point of clarification. Can we have a charter change that simply says to grant the city of Charlottesville the ability to set its own council's salary without setting any formula or setting any cap or limit?
Yes, you could ask the Assembly for a charter change that in effect makes that just very declaratory, short statement and does not tie it to the general law.
I'd be open to that.
I would agree with that then. I mean, that gives us time to explore it. And then that gives us time to really understand what other peer cities are doing, what other formulas there are besides maybe population, maybe other indicators can be used so that there is something that you can hang your hat on as to why we pay councils that. But if it's left open that we gives us the authority to set our own salaries, I can certainly go along with that
But Mr. Blair,
without knowing the specific
I think
Or
I've
not?
I'm sure that I've lost this, but I'm confused. I thought that our charter could trump the state limits just by default. So could we just add a different figure into the charter just through that?
You
Common
you
law
could
rights?
certainly ask
Or that
for
way,
that
right?
as well. You could ask for a specific salary.
But do we need
still
to
need to
ask for it?
ask.
Because when we
Yes,
raised it the
you
last
would.
time, we didn't have to ask.
Well,
for it.
that
was
was
already a
pursuant
law.
to state law.
Ah, we already,
But,
or within
but
the
if
range.
you're, I think Mayor Walker's proposal is the state law limits do not adequately compensate you all for the time you put in. And so the charter amendment is a way to make this specific to Charlottesville to ask for greater compensation for city councilors here.
Okay. So is there a motion?
That you Or you can't make the motion?
I move that we include in the legislative packet a charter change to give council full latitude to determine its salaries independent of the Virginia Code's formulas.
Well, let me
that-
just add this in. As with any other charter change, this would require a public hearing.
Absolutely.
And so the public hearing, we would need to write the ad tomorrow to reflect what you're saying, and there would be a public hearing December 3rd if you want to have this charter change considered by the 2019 General Assembly.
I'd be comfortable with that. And then we would still have to do our homework to get the actual salary set, but we would have the authority granted by the General Assembly to at least do that. Okay. I'm comfortable with that. And that my motion,
So your motion is, in effect, to authorize a public hearing on December 3rd for a charter change that gives Charlottesville City Council the ability to set its salary without being constrained by the limits of state law.
so moved.
And do we need to have a cap on or in that proposal? Because if not, then we're back to what
Square
was some
root.
of the concerns of it being,
But we could establish it once we finally figured that out. This is making it so that we have no constraints. This is giving us the freedom to establish those rates, those salaries.
but I think too, and Mr. Blair, we chatted about just a future council being able to just set
Sure.
its salary at whatever amount that they
Correct. If
want
the
it to.
charter is amended as Councilor Galvin's asking, there
Yeah.
wouldn't be a cap either, a cap going up or down if
Yeah.
it was general authority.
And so you all know how I am with money and that I make sure that I do all the research when we're setting any salary and proposing it. So I'm that fiscal responsibility, I have it down packed. And so I would want to make sure that if a council came in and thought that they were doing more work in this, council manager form of government we had, they could essentially, based on what you're saying, and that's why I was trying to process what a cap could potentially look like. They could set it at whatever amount, which could be more than a 1/5 of a city manager salary.
I just don't think I don't have the information in front of me and the peer comparisons to look at to make a decision of the level of specificity that you're speaking to. All I know is that I am not comfortable with pegging it to the city manager's salary. And I wanted to still give us the latitude to create a new formula in keeping with this General Assembly packet and schedule. But right now, I don't know what that cap is. I don't know if there is a cap. I really, it gets down to needing more research and need to have more input from the public.
So what would you propose?
Well, I thought it was a very innovative idea. I know Mr. Blunt and I talked about like the city manager's salary. That is an interesting way to frame a cap. There's, just sitting here thinking about possibilities. One possible cap would be, say, the council may increase its salary, but it couldn't increase its salary by more than X percentage until after the next general election. That's one possibility when you talk about what sort of caps could you put into such charter provision.
It's just,
And again,
with
just
all
not-
respect to everybody, it just is very, like, when I talked before about, and this is kind of where we are right now, because we don't have a chief of staff, we're not very, this came, I saw this the first time last Wednesday. So we're sort of legislating on the fly here. This is not best practice. I mean, it's a good impulse, but there's not consensus that's been built up through a lot of discussion of this. And it doesn't feel ripe. It doesn't feel ready.
But we're asking for a public hearing on the 3rd, but you're saying, do we need the cap in the language to have the public hearing?
You don't have to have a cap, no.
Okay.
Now, what you can do is authorize a public hearing for something similar to what Councilor Galvin was talking about. And then based on the public input at the public hearing, your final proposal to the charter, if you all wanted to add a cap at that point based on the public hearing, that's a possibility as well.
Okay. All right. So Kathy,
So
Sure.
my motion still stands. I'll see if I can reread it. Authorize by public hearing on December 3rd, that gives council the ability to set its salary without constraints, without being constrained by state law.
Ms. Galvin, if I may, perhaps I could read you the Alexandria language so that you hear what an example
I
without
would
the
love
cap
that.
expressed sounds like in their charter. Members of the council and the mayor shall receive in full compensation for their services, the rate of compensation set by ordinance, except that no such rate of compensation shall be increased to become effective during the terms of office of the members of council and the mayor in which the vote to increase the compensation is cast. So, it's their example of how to have the authority without setting the caps.
So that just gives them, it is what you said.
Yeah.
It just gives them the right. And then you leave
Okay.
it up to the lawyers to make sure you don't say without constraint.
Right.
Right.
And I was just
Yeah,
paraphrasing
no,
our
it's fine.
lawyer.
It was good.
So-
Yeah.
So I said, I'm willing to go that route. I'm willing to do that. But it does mean that I'm not sure that we're going to be getting the clarity of direction from the public that we need to be setting caps. That there's no way of getting around it. We're going to have to do some research. We're going to have to dig in and find out what other communities are doing. What other bases do they use? Is it population growth? Is it population and community poverty levels? What is it? Is it based on the area median income of the area, cost of living, the consumer price index? All these different things could be factors that create the rationale for what we are establishing our council on.
Ms. Galvin may make a friendly, well, it's not even an amendable form right now, but that it would include that qualifier from the Alexandria language, was that it may not apply to members of the current body. I mean, that's what I think the standard is. I just want to,
But I think that's state law.
that's state.
But that's
That's
part
state
of the
law.
state, that
Yeah.
But
after
we've also
the
said that-
council election. But
But if we
But
said
to your
that
point-
there can be a conflict where the locality wins, I just would want that to be explicit in this.
to your point, I can draw up a public ad for the newspaper that in effect mimics Alexandria's language.
Yes.
but that's essentially just what happened with this increase. You all voted, well, 3 of you, right? Well, Mike didn't vote for it, but
And that
Counselor
was already
Galvin
the
and
established
the max,
formula
but then
by
it couldn't
Virginia
take
law.
effect until after the,
Yeah,
The
it was the
election.
July
It was just
after.
last July.
Yeah,
It was just this last July, this fiscal year.
when it was voted on in 2015.
You guys voted
No,
on it in the
2016.
last council. I think it
It was
was 2017. But we didn't take effect until the new council was seated.
yeah.
And it was the
So
new
that's the
fiscal
same
year.
Right,
process?
right.
Yeah, okay. All right, is there a second?
So are you gonna second it? I wanna know, that are you just supporting this? I mean,
Yes,
you brought,
I mean-
okay. Then I'll second it.
Okay,
I just wanna understand that what you're the one putting this forward. I wanna make sure that this is at a point where if you're the one bringing it forward, it
yeah,
has your
we're gonna
support.
hear from the public, yeah.
There was before we vote, there was a really good suggestion that was just emailed. What do you all think about tying the cap of sorts to the existing AMI?
Well, that was one of the ideas that I threw out there just now. But there could be others.
All right, maybe I was
So-
zoned out. Okay,
I just want to see how other communities do it.
Okay,
cool.
all right.
So,
All right, so it carries 4-1.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, next we have appropriation, Water Street Parking Garage supplemental appropriation for $900,077, first of two readings.
Good evening, council.
Good
Moving
evening.
on to a more operational item. This item is before you today due to the change that we are transitioning through with the Water Street Parking Garage. You'll recall in July of this year, you all approved us moving forward with a settlement with Charlottesville Parking Center, and we are moving through that transition whereby the city and its parking management firm oversees the entire garage, and we now have to make some changes to our budget because that happened in the middle of a fiscal year. So this is a revenue neutral change. We're simply changing the way we received the money from the Water Street Parking Garage. In the past, we received one net revenue check at the end of a year. Now we are receiving monthly revenues, and we have expenses to pay in addition to that. So this is a supplemental appropriation that allows the city finance department to actually pay those expenses on a monthly basis, but this is actually an allocation for the entire remaining fiscal year. I have Mr. Rick Siebert, who's our parking manager, who's been part of the negotiations and part of this daily transition here as we've taken over the Water Street Garage, to answer any specific questions if you have them at this point. This is a two-reading appropriation before you tonight.
Are there any questions?
Good job.
yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll open the public hearing. No.
It's not a public hearing.
Oh, it has it down here, okay.
And it's a first of two readings?
It's the first of two readings.
Okay.
I just was curious, just in terms of kind of the expected costs versus the real costs of some of the maintenance. Do we feel like we're on par with what our expectations were coming into it now as the owners? You see things on paper and there's only so much you can see until you kind of take ownership. I'd just like to get a little clarification around where the deltas are.
There's some items that need attention, and we're starting to work on those. We've got a few contracts lined up to repair some concrete work in the short term, and then there's probably some longer-term maintenance that will need to get assessed and scheduled over the
And
next
what
couple
onus was
years.
there on the former owners, or on the owner, for like those like some of those costs if they were beyond what was expected?
Well, we have been an owner, and we're just.
Right, I'm sorry, but the partner.
We were part of a
whatever we're
condo
calling-
association
Yeah.
that was stuck in a cycle where there wasn't a budget approved for 2 years. So there wasn't any significant action taken with respect to major maintenance during that period of time. Now we're moving out of that, and we will be taking more aggressive action to get a more regular assessment and perform maintenance as needed.
That was fairly limited, actually, the amount of deferred maintenance, given the fact that we spent a 2-year period without an agreed-upon budget by all the parties of the condominium association. It's on the order of about $30,000 worth of repairs. We would have paid 70% of it anyway. We are going to be stuck with the extra 30% based on the fact that we've now taken control of the facility. The other thing is we are spending some money this year. We're doing some upgrades to the garage. We're upgrading the parking equipment both in the Market Street garage and the Water Street garage. We're taking the old parking equipment that is well past its useful life and replacing it. We're also going to upgrade the camera system in the Water Street garage, which probably should have been done 5 or 6 years ago. But there's been a lot of progress in the quality of cameras now, and I think that's a good public safety thing. So we are doing some things this year that may affect the total revenue numbers, but in terms of the parking fund, we've been working with our folks in budget, and we're still on track for a very positive year.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So this is going to go on the consent agenda.
Yes.
All right, next we have a report from the Downtown Business Association, marketing update.
Good evening. My name is Jason Ness with the Office of Economic Development. Just want to give a quick recap of the Downtown Business Association marketing grant that was approved in March of this year. As you may recall, DBAC requested as part of the fiscal year 19 budget a $250,000 request for operations staff and marketing. After conversations with the city manager, it was ultimately decided to put forth a $75,000 marketing request immediately in March. Council approved that and also included a $30,000 match requirement for DBAC to have in cash or in kind. Our office was the liaison to this process and was tasked with tracking the progress and processing the funds. So immediately after council approved the funds, DBAC did outreach to businesses and stakeholders downtown. They visited over 300 offices and businesses, did surveys on how to spend the money. The DBAC board of directors ultimately voted not to focus on a membership drive to increase membership, but to do a comprehensive downtown Seville campaign focused on the area as a way and kind of promote the unique characteristics of the mall compared to competitors. Since it launched in September, it's garnered a lot of support and galvanized businesses downtown. They help fundraise for events, seasonal lighting, and part-time staff to help with the website launch. To date, 60% of the funds have been reimbursed by the city, and DBAC has exceeded the match requirement by over 20%. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, and also would acknowledge that some of the DBAC board members are here to speak as well, if you would like.
Do you want to speak?
I have a question. In terms of, I know ROI is hard to get because we don't segregate tax revenue for that by block, right? But is there any way of more with, and maybe the business folks could talk more about this, with any more specificity to kind of talk about the way in which the program addressed the concern that brought it, which
Right.
was this real, I mean, like weird stories of businesses, maxing out their lines of credit because they couldn't pay their employees. I mean, there was a real, and the statistics bore that out. If I remember, the statistics that could be gotten, although you couldn't see for that one corridor, but it is the economic engine and
Right.
the plan. So anyway, could you or someone talk more about
Sure.
ROI?
It's a little early in the game. Having the campaign just launched in September. So to actually have indicators and data and metrics we don't have that at this time. But what we're going to look at is obviously tax revenue. The commissioner revenue can pull out the downtown area, so we can compare that year over year. He has the ability to pull out meals tax as well from sales tax. So we'll use that. We can look at metrics like, as Rick was talking earlier, parking metrics. We can check with the downtown mall Wi-Fi usage rates and compare them to previous years as well. And then also working with downtown Charlottesville DowntownCharlottesville.com to see their metrics and social media presence as well.
Okay, thanks.
I wouldn't mind hearing from the public. It's all right.
Here we are, Hi, I'm Blair Williamson of the DBAC and Ray Von Dorn. I wanted to just click on our website. Is it going to flash up anywhere else?
David, will bring it up.
There it goes. It did. For them to see, voila. Okay, on the screen behind you is the website that we, was the product of what we've done in the business community. I wanted to tell you that we, as a Downtown Business Association, we did knock on 300 doors, because one of the issues that we have as an association is that we don't have a common owner like Stonefield or Barracks Road, where everybody pays. So we don't really have that overarching theme that could go, okay, here's all your people. So we first had to find out who we all were, truth be told. So we went around and got everybody's name and numbers and solicited a survey to ask what was important to folks. We had many open marketing committee meetings with the downtown business community, asking what are their main concerns, and this campaign is really geared towards people in Charlottesville. It's right now we feel like we have the tourists coming downtown, but what we don't have is the local community. And so we decided that sort of Uncommon is our name, because we're not like everybody else. We're a bunch of independent little businesses that come together to form a beautiful Uncommon experience. And we have you'll see by the topics on the top, experience, eat. Experience might be like movies and entertainment, eat, obviously restaurants, shopping, wellness, services, and then up in this upper corner up here, you have the events calendar. If you click on that, you can see an interactive, exactly what's happening today. You pick a date anywhere, and you can see what's going on. This can be populated by anybody. Over here on the right hand, about 3 o'clock, it says add an event. Anybody can add an event. And it does get previewed through, right now through, I believe it's going through Blue Ridge Group, just to make sure that it's an appropriate, common community event, so that we wouldn't have some, protests that would not be in the spirit of what this calendar is about and in the spirit of the community. We did have the firms. We originally agreed to. We hired Blue Ridge Group to get the team together, and they brought in a company called VibeThink to do the website programming. Howard Films to do some of the overarching photographs of the Bantam social media, which has a pretty robust social media campaign. Andrew Shirtliff Photography, another company called Scene Think, and together those companies donated $56,000 and change in-kind services. And then the media partners that we have are the Daily Progress, Seaville Weekly, NBC 29, Discover Charlottesville, Bloom, and Charlottesville Welcome. And those companies together donated another $21,000 in in-kind. And then so to date we have $78,000 in in-kind, so we've more than doubled your investment. And then we still have more to come with the Charlottesville Radio Group, Monticello Media, and CBS 19, and maybe others that I don't have off the top of my head. But we appreciate the investment, and we look forward to partnering in the future. I've heard you guys talk about Roanoke a lot tonight, and Alexandria, and some of these other communities, and how they partner with their business community. And we're going to do a little research ourselves and see what that looks like, and what we can maybe work towards in the future, and creating a vibrant business community downtown. And then Ray. Roy.
Just briefly, Blair covered most of it. We had a tired and ineffective website, and it's been really updated. We didn't have a calendar that really worked.
I know.
It was tragic.
And for a volunteer organization, which our budget's like $20,000 a year, you can't do a lot. So what the investment you did with us, and it's been a group effort, it's been like lighting a fuse. Downtown is a lot more galvanized. We've incorporated a lot of new media that we hadn't really explored. And Susan at Blue Ridge has really woven together, under the direction of the marketing committee, tried to pull in and bring up some things that we probably couldn't have done by ourselves.
I'm sure we couldn't have.
Yeah, and I think it's just the beginning. I think it's going to be hard to measure metrics in a vacuum because this isn't the only marketing that's going on. This isn't the only dynamic that's going on. The weather may play a bigger role than the marketing. There's so many variables. But, I'm in the marketing business. That's what I do. And I've just been in awe of what we've accomplished with this. And it's not done yet either.
So part of the discussion we had was centered around inclusion and diversity, and there was some discussion, at least we received an email from the leadership Charlottesville and the group that you all partnered with to develop this. So what was the response?
Well, I think
from that?
one of the things that Susan, when she made her presentation at that group, she showed a couple of early slides on rather than the full website. And the marketing committee was very diverse. We looked at, as Blair said, we looked at the entire community as who our primary audience was. Those that live in our neighborhood, those that live in Albemarle County, because downtown has lost market share to the community. And that's our goal, is to try to recapture that.
To the private developments, the private shopping
Yeah,
developments.
so that was our focus. And I think we've got a good platform here, so we can start working on other areas to incorporate all of the community. But that's been our goal from day one.
Okay, so it wasn't just the not being represented in the slides, it was also in the verbal,
Yeah,
the
and
comments.
I'm not going to say, but
Okay.
probably we all say things and we get flustered.
No, if you all have hired someone
Right.
that's supposed to help with, solve a major part, one of the major issues, then you have to make sure that person has the capacity to do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
All right, next we have a report on a progress update on the city's commitment to the Global Compact of Mayors. Good evening.
Thank you for coming this evening.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, let me get this. Is there a
You can do function at 11.
function 11? All right, good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah. So for tonight, I'm going to have a go through a slide deck as well. If y'all want to, you guys are ready for that? Let's see. So in the memo that was in your council packet, there's a lot of hyperlinks and there's a lot of data and also background information that I tried to keep this part fairly succinct as much as I can, but there is a lot of other background information. So please feel free to ask me about that later or to dive into some of those pieces. For tonight, what I was hoping to go over plan to go over is to do a brief review of what the Global Compact of Mayors commitment and the requirements for that are, to do a summary of what the first phase of that was, which is the 2016 greenhouse gas inventory, to talk a little bit about what the process was for that inventory and the findings, to then talk about what phase 2 of the Compact of Mayors is that we are starting off on, and then to answer any questions, comments, and discussion that you guys might have about it. So with the Compact of Mayors, this was a commitment that council made in June of 2017. There are 3 different phases to completing this, and over a total of 3 years. Each phase then builds on what the products were of the previous phase. The Compact of Mayors offers guidance and also requirements for compliance, and there are different chapters that also offer different resources and tools for staff to use as they move forward through each of these 3 phases. Where we are currently, the commitment that was made last June, we completed the first part. We have submitted the inventory for phase 1. Who we submitted it to, they are verifying it, and we are hoping to hear back from them in December to get confirmation that we did meet all the compliance pieces.
I'm sorry, who's the entity verifying these things?
It's CDP. They're formerly known as the Carbon Disclosure Project. There are 2 different reporting platforms that are accepted by the Global Compact of Mayors, and CDP is one of those 2. And so having completed that, we're looking forward at setting the greenhouse gas reduction target and moving to that phase 2, which also includes assessing climate vulnerabilities. So to go into a brief review of what we did in terms of the 2016 greenhouse gas inventory. 2016 was the data that was available at the time when we started off on this process. Usually that data can take about a year and a half to come out after that calendar year is concluded. The wheel that you see on the right is the basic process for how you put together a greenhouse gas inventory. You start in the upper right-hand corner, so you go through what your scoping is, then you move through your data collection, your emissions calculations into reporting, and then you look at your quality assurance, quality control improvements, so that when you start off with your next cycle of going through an inventory, you can build on that work and framework that you put together originally. The 2016 data is compared to our baseline year of 2000 and also to the previous inventory year that we have, which is 2011. Per the Global Compact of Mayors, the reporting protocols that we have to follow are called GPC, which stands for Global Protocol for Community Scale Greenhouse Gas Emissions Inventories. This is a standard that is used for cities around the world, and it is looking at community-wide level of data, and that includes all activities within the city limits that are associated with greenhouse gas emissions within what's feasible for gathering that data. Typically what that means is it's within data availability. So I've put together a list of what type of data sources we end up getting. From the utilities, we get something in aggregate, and that screenshot at the bottom is actually one of the data sets that we get from Dominion Power. We do not get individual business data. We do not get individual resident data. We get an aggregate amount for all residential accounts together. If you're looking at something like a multifamily property, where if the account for those units is a master metered one, so it is the owner of the building, the business that actually has that, and utilities are then included, Dominion would classify that as a commercial account, and we are unable to pull that data out of that commercial number and put it into residential. So what we are working with is what we can get from the utilities in terms of those classifications on there. It's largely accurate, but there is some little pieces of that where there is some imprecision with it. We work with the actual bills that the city gets for its utilities and fuel. We work with the University of Virginia. Part of their buildings are within the city and city jurisdiction, and so they are being pulled in under the governmental number for Dominion. We work with the university to actually have pulled out their numbers for all 3 of the inventory years that we're looking at here so that we can be consistent, but also so that when we start talking about policies and what targets we're setting for the city of Charlottesville, we're not mixing in UVA's activity into that as well. Some of the data that we have, there is no single source provider, like a utility that we can get that from. And so then we end up going into things that are calculations usually based per capita. So we'll pull from the American Community Survey, from the Census, from the Energy Information Administration. Calculations for fuel oil, propane, and wood are 3 examples of things where we don't have a supplier where we can get a number from. And so we're using a proportional calculation based on our population size. For transportation data, we pull from some of the Virginia Department of Transportation's resources, and we also pull from data sets that the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission produced for us. So what this ends up looking like, one typical way that people often portray what their greenhouse gas emission profile for their community is as a pie chart. From here you can see that consistently through all 3 of these inventory years, our residential energy use, our commercial energy use, and our community transport are our 3 largest sectors. And consistently, in terms of percentage, they total to 80 to 90% in each of these inventory years. What this pie chart doesn't show you, though, is how big is that pie. So what reductions have we seen year by year with it? And so then we'll switch to trying to show the data in some sort of a stacked bar chart. So we're seeing that from 2000 to 2016, there was a significant decrease. In terms of trying to understand what's happening with this out of the data that we have, what's important to think about is the way that the emissions number is calculated. So we start off with looking at what the emissions factors are, multiply that by what the actual activity date is, and that's how we come up with that total emissions number. To break that apart a little bit more, if you're looking at emissions factors, different fuel sources end up when they're consumed, end up producing different types of greenhouse gases, which have different impacts on global warming. So for example, 1 metric ton of methane is equivalent to 25 metric tons of carbon dioxide in terms of its global warming impact. So the units that we use when we're talking about what is happening with emissions is the CO2e. It's the equivalent to carbon dioxide. If you then are changing your fuel source to something that has less of a global warming impact, you may still be consuming the same number of energy units for that, but your impact on climate change is less or can vary with that. As an example, if you look at the purple line on the 2 charts below, the left-hand chart shows the amount of energy units of electricity that Charlottesville purchased as a community in 2000 through 2016. There was a 7% increase in the amount of energy from electricity that was purchased. The chart on the right, though, is showing you what the emissions impact is from that, and we actually had a 15% decrease. How can that be? What happened over that time period was that our utility supplier, Dominion Power, ended up taking a lot of its coal-powered plants offline and started replacing that energy generation with natural gas. Natural gas has less of an impact in terms of global warming than coal, and so that's why we saw that reduction in emissions, even though we, as a community, increased the amount of electricity that we were purchasing and consuming.
Okay.
On the other half of that equation, the activity data. So this, I'm now switching over to the transportation sector. What the relationship between these 3 graphs is on the left, we're actually seeing that we had an increase in the number of vehicle miles that were traveled within the city of Charlottesville between 2000 and 2016. But the amount of energy it took us to actually travel those miles, which is the middle chart, reduced. And there was a similar rate of reduction in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions. So what this is showing is on our activity data, those emissions that you're seeing as the reductions on the far right side, those were the result of having more efficient technology, that we were using less energy to move our vehicles that distance. But as a community, we actually ended up traveling more distance for it. Similar on that activity data side, things like what we're doing with on-site renewable energy, installation, energy efficiency of technologies, and just energy conservation behaviors come through on that activity data. When we see that activity data number change, we can't tell from the data we have if that's because somebody put solar panels on their building and their building is actually using the same amount of energy, but they're just purchasing less now from Dominion. Or is it because they did improvements that mean that to run and operate that building, they're able to use less energy now than what they did before? So moving forward into, well, where does this end up taking us as we're pulling out and looking at what are the results that came out of our inventory? I tried to do a sort of chart on the left that shows how the comparisons change from 2000 to 2011 up to 2016. And really what the key takeaways are when we're looking at this bigger roll-up of what we see in the 2016 data is that there's a significant increase in the rate of reductions that we are seeing. So out of about 15 years of data, the first 2/3 of that, we saw a 3% reduction. And in the last 5 years, the last third of that time period, we saw a 21% reduction. And what this means is that there are a lot of big opportunities that are available to our community now that were not available 5 to 10 years ago. When we start looking ahead at what is our next reduction target, we're looking at timescales that are 15 to 30 years out. And so we need to keep in mind that what we have now is more than what we had 10 years ago. And what we're going to have as opportunities in 10 years from now is going to look different than what we have right now.
And so that's simply because of changes in technology?
It's a variety of things. One piece of it is change of technology. Some of it is what's changing in the market. If you want, taking solar panels as an example, the cost for solar has drastically reduced, but also for within a single panel, the amount of energy it can produce when the sun's on it has increased.
Okay.
So we're seeing that on both sides of those.
Great.
In terms of just energy conservation behaviors, the idea of turning off the lights. Now with all the different gadgets that are out there, you can actually set lights into plugs that communicate to your phone that senses when you leave the house to turn everything off. So the opportunities for how we can save energy have changed now from what they were before. This entire market, in terms of financing programs, getting industry and opportunities and programs available, has changed. What's coming out of Dominion utility-funded programs has changed as a market. Virginia, looking at going into the regional greenhouse gas initiative with cap and trade, is going to put different economic markets at play with it. The VW settlement funds that the state is starting to allocate out. All of these different pieces are changing what's happening in the market around us. So some of it is technology improvements on the transportation side, CAFE standards. All of that is all coming to play down at the local level. And so a lot of those pieces, though, the fuel sources, technology efficiency, the second bullet point there, those are things that are outside of what our local control is. But when we have the opportunity for either making policy statements or taking a leadership role and setting targets and saying these are things we want to achieve and that we have a commitment to as a community, that plays into that dialogue of what's happening beyond our borders that we don't have direct control over. But also, it also means that local action does matter. It means that we can continue to affect that activity data. It means that we can see growth in our community without meaning that we have to increase what our emissions outputs are. It also means that we can see improvements in activity here that improve our quality of life, that improve our comfort in our buildings, that improve the cost of what it is to heat and cool those, to have those function, and to deal with congestion, things like that. So looking at what we have coming up with our phase 2 of the target, we have to do a community-wide greenhouse gas reduction target. And then we have to also look at taking what came out of climate vulnerability identification and looking at what our risk and vulnerability assessment pieces with this. The compact does, like I said before, they do have guidance, they have compliance requirements. There's a lot of words on the screen. All this is also hyperlinked in your packet. I'm not going to read it all out loud right now. But the key pieces to realize is that it has to cover the community as a whole. We can't just focus in on our transportation sector by itself or just our commercial sector. We need to look at everything as a whole. Within that, when we get to the next phase, which is our planning, we can then identify strategies and methods that do target certain parts of our population, certain sectors. But at this point, when we're setting a target, we're looking community-wide for what that target is. In terms of what does a reduction target look like, when we produced the 2011 data for the inventory, at that point, the idea, because we saw the data was going up, we said 10% reduction below our baseline by 2035. We've now exceeded what that is over the last 5 years. As was referenced earlier tonight in public comment, the IPCC report has recommended that we actually need something that's more aggressive than what we thought we were going to need. That to keep global warming levels at 1.5 degrees warming rather than up to 2, they're recommending a 45% reduction by 2030 from 2010 levels. So our baseline currently is 2000. So we'd be looking more recent, setting a new baseline that's more recent, and then net zero by 2050. The report references that they are already seeing the consequences of a 1 degree global warming impact, and that some of the pieces of the difference of limiting it to 1.5 rather than 2 can be pretty significant in terms of what's happening in our environment. When they're looking at this, they're talking about what will be in 80 years from now. So we'll have lower levels of global sea level rise, but we'll still have sea level rise. Rather than having once every decade an ice-free Arctic in the summer, it'll only be once every century. That's a new thing for us as a world. Like, we've had a full ice pack over the summer. So this is a changing piece that's going to happen. It's the question of how frequently is it going to happen. In terms of the coral reef decline at 1.5 degrees, it's only 70 to 90% of that will die off. Whereas if it goes up to 2 degrees global warming, 90%, 99% and higher is going to be gone. All these different pieces have different ramifications on what is going to happen locally, what's going to happen with global climate. Comments that came in through the comp plan were referencing what's going to happen to food systems, and there's a wide variety of effects. And so the IPCC report is referencing is 45% reduction by 2030 based on 2010 levels at that time. Other goals that are out there talk about 100% renewable energy, 100% carbon-free, a wide variety of communities in the Southeast, and also some states such as North Carolina have started setting goals. There's going to be different strategies for different targets of what you're trying to achieve in different sectors. But what we're looking at overall, if you're looking at the waste sector, we're going to be trying to see things that are going to be reducing organic matter that's going to landfill, reducing waste, more recycling. If you're looking at transportation, we're looking at alternative fuel vehicles. How do we better manage congestion as a community? How do we move more people in the same space, but using less carbon fuels? And in terms of our buildings, it's how do we heat and cool them without breaking the bank, but also where we don't need as much energy for it. And how do we improve that side of the balance sheet so that then when we add renewable onto there, that renewable can have a much larger impact on site to that building owner and those occupants.
Excuse me, are you going to be giving us like recommendations on how to begin to target that 45% reduction?
That would be part of what would come in the planning phase.
Okay.
So the sequencing of it is that with the target, you set your timeline and you set your scale of reduction. And then going into the plan is when you can start piecemealing that apart. A lot of times it'll end up being shown as a wedge diagram. So with what your starting point is, where you need to go, and then there will be one wedge of it that says, well, this is what we're going to do with transportation. And then this wedge of here we're going to do with our stationary energy, our buildings and our lighting. And this part's going to be out of our waste. Because with these, we are looking into the future. There is technology and advancements we don't know. Typically with them, there is also some cushion in there that is a little bit of a, and then we're going to reassess. If we have a 15-year goal, we're going to reassess in 5 years and see what new things have come up so we can integrate those in. So there is an iterative piece that typically goes into those planning processes once you know what that scale of reduction needs to be and over what timeline. And that's what the target part is. So the proposed timeline that we've put out there to try to at least create the opportunity for members of the community to be involved in the conversation and also to provide them with background information so that they can begin to engage on this topic if they are not already familiar with it, would be to start with this month in this meeting of announcing that this is our timeline, this is what we're going to be talking about come spring. Begin putting out packets of information, kind of primers on Goal Setting 101. What is a greenhouse gas reduction target? What do these things start to look like? What are types of strategies that might be associated with these types of reductions? What are those changes in terms of solar panels that we've seen of what's the cost? What's the difference of the technology? What does that mean on the ground in terms of our populace and our energy use and consumption? Continuing that, and then in February, having an open comment period to get input from the community. Then in April, bringing the summary of that to you all along with draft recommendations for a target, getting feedback from you all, opening up a second public comment period for the public to comment on those draft recommendations, and then coming back in June with a recommendation that hopefully you all will be happy with and will want to adopt. And so that's the timeline we are anticipating at this point following through, but we are open to other feedback and comments from you guys as well on that.
And this is excellent. I am concerned that you're might be operating somewhat in a vacuum of or distinct from all the other initiatives going on that are going to have direct bearing on our strategies for affordable housing, our strategies for public transportation, and our strategies for zoning. Because to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions, it's going to take all of those sectors, as you well know. So when you're talking about your engagement, is it going to be a situation where you'll interface with, say, the Housing Advisory Committee as they're going through their public engagement process to have opening discussions about affordable housing? The Regional Transit Partnership as well is going to be, we're going to be having a meeting I guess in the spring where we're going to unveil some recommendations to the joint summit of the city and county. And I just think this is an important piece in all of those conversations. And then at some point when we get the comprehensive plan updated, we're going to be launching into zoning, and you know all too well the work you did to get the changes in our zoning so that we could accommodate the solar and infrastructure a lot better. So can you just illuminate a little bit? Is there any notion or plan to begin informing those other initiatives about this also overarching need?
So without having a specific target that we would be introducing those conversations, we can definitely engage in terms of what this topic matter is and that how these different topics interrelate in terms of the sectors that we have. I'm not completely familiar with what all those different timelines are and for those meetings to be able to speak clearly to how they all fit together. But at minimum, there would be an interest in talking with those groups, sharing what the data is, and talking about how those pieces impact. I would suspect that it's hearing from members of the community, like we heard earlier tonight, that these are pieces of what our community sees and where they're seeing these interconnections.
Councilor Galvin, can I follow up? Just a thought on that. I think a similar goal, which would instead of implementing it that way, which would be to say, hey, you got to go and do a lot of community engagement, meet with these. What if one of the outputs of the strategy was that it becomes a best practice in the city, maybe even mandated by council, that just like we do, this is so important. I mean, what this report has done, I think through, all of our lives, it did crystallize how dangerous this is right now, and I think a different way. I've heard a level of panic in just regular people's voices about what this means for their kids, like all across the spectrum everywhere, and so maybe we need an environmental impact statement or something different. Maybe it means that with city projects where there is energy that is going to be used, like CIP projects and city departments, it becomes something that we require and we can measure, and we're focused on it, and it's something that it's like embedded into the planning almost by policy. So it becomes something that we look at, just like when we look at how does this measure against our comp plan goals. Every memo we get, maybe that would be a big decision, but to elevate, it's sort of like the equity lens too, which we've been talking about. That's a practice that's emerging around the country. We could start to really look at the impact. But the other thing that I would say, and that as we do the strategy, we think about that. But the other thing is that it really makes the most sense to look at the county with us. We have these 6 MOUs now. We're in an unusual situation because they physically surround us. 2.5 times our size. We do have the MOUs where we're agreeing to cooperate with them. They're getting very progressive on a lot of things. I think is a good thing for the county. So I think having a discussion with them about but then also listening, because they may want to do different things than we do. But really, it's like this is a 180,000 person community that's really different from a 50,000 person community. That has a much bigger impact, and we are tied together. Cars go over there, they come over here, they come, it's greenhouse gases don't respect boundaries. So, but it's really nice to see all this result from the joining.
The recommendations we would have in the draft, the April 2019 draft. Right.
So that would be a draft recommendation on a target. It would not be a full plan at that point. Planning is the next phase that comes after the target part.
How long would the plan take?
Sorry?
How long would the plan take?
So with what we have set out by the Global Compact of Mayors is a year to do that. How we set up what the steering committee parts are, all of that would be, that all affects that process. I believe Arlington took 2 years to do those. One of the things is with and it was referenced earlier, the LCAP report, the Local Climate Action Planning Process, that's set up a 5-part framework. As I said, things have changed in the market of what opportunities there are in the last 5 years, but that would be a starting point. So we're not starting from scratch on that. There have been different programs and efforts that have been already moving through. And so we have a good semblance of things to start off with as strategies. What I think out of what we have currently is not really clear policy goals around that this needs to be part of like a regional transportation strategy. That's part of conversation as one of the consideration points for it. So certain things like that I think could get introduced into a plan that were not, that were more in spirit wrapped into the LCAP, but not as explicitly stated.
In my comments, just echo what he just said about the regional piece of this, because I just think in the university is a big player, and just in terms of how we're leveraging each other's resources, because we are resource constrained in terms of experts in this. But I think what we heard tonight was just a lot of engagement from this community, people who are really educated on this. That how do we kind of garner that and just bring that in help us to get to where we need to go, because I'm super inspired by all that we heard across the board, and even the singing. So.
But that doesn't mean that because if the county's not on board, or if they are still contemplating, or wherever they are in the process, then our staff will still.
Oh no, we're
continue.
pressing it. I'm just saying.
Okay.
I've heard from what I've read that this is a priority for the county.
Yeah,
I mean,
this
as
rose
much
to
as
the
we're,
top.
this seems like it's at the top of their list, and the university has a lot of resources. But like I said, I think that our local resources don't just draw their lines at the city border either.
Mm-hmm.
They are supporting this region, and so how we can tap into those resources, the community resources, to help us regionally.
And so I know that university is going through one planning piece, and the county is also embarking on one of theirs. And so staff between those three entities are all trading notes and tracking what we're doing and how we're approaching different pieces. Each of our processes are different, and we're at different stages within that timeline. When we're talking about regional, like sort of systems and structures, when we're talking about transportation and waste, those are much more regional. When we start talking about what the situations with our buildings, just
Right.
looking at the
Sure.
years at which our homes and our buildings were built, it becomes a little bit more different. But there are certain financing programs that if the county's interested in passing one and the city's interested in passing the same type of program, it would absolutely make sense for our community for us to try to be as
Yes.
much in
Yes.
coordination and lockstep around that. And what are the terms of that program, and what is the look and feel
Yes.
of it as possible, so that if you're a contractor, you're a property owner in the two places, it's the same rules. It's not a confusion piece of, well, am I here or am I there? Or, wait, is it 5% or is it 4% or what's going on? So there's opportunities for coordination, but depending on what the strategy is and the target,
Because you
it
talk
can
about those building blocks, I can
vary.
just see some of them having a lot of synergies, and like especially we talk about like the end user, like as a contractor would be, how do you make this as simple as possible so that people's buy-in is easy.
Yeah. Yeah, and so one of the things with, we work a lot with the Local Energy Alliance program with LEAP, and in the city, we've had a home energy checkup at a $45 entry point for residents for several years now, and the county has just now also started offering that. And that's really the first step for someone who's educated about what your home is, how it works as a whole, not just how one system or one piece of it is, to come in, do some direct energy installs on it, but really then have that conversation with you as the homeowner or the occupant about what is happening, what is affecting your comfort, how are your systems and that working, and what, if you were going to do some upgrades, would give you the financially fit within your budget, but also give you the most comfort that you can get out of it and save the most energy. And that's something that's been programs across the country I've been hearing about at conferences for years now. That part of being actually able to have that conversation with the homeowner is one of the hardest barriers to get over. And so by having that home energy checkup, which is one of the things through the Climate Protection Program we work with LEAP on, that gets in that part, and that gets that education for our residents and gets them that direct service. And so the fact that those sort of best practices and services are starting to do cross jurisdictional lines is a good thing for our community.
All right. Any other questions?
It's just like April is like a draft to us, and June is a more final version.
That's what we're proposing at this point. Yeah.
It would just be good to, like, obviously we'll keep our ears open. I would love to participate in some of this just because there's a lot of learning for me.
Sure.
It'd be great.
Yeah, and we are planning on getting the data more accessible and online,
great.
not just in a
Yeah.
PDF with the charts, so that then anyone who wants to dive into the data can really do their own personal deep dive in.
Great.
And the ultimate goal, though, is to get these metrics, these targets, that we will have then the tools to go and meet them, and we'll have the means to measure them. So all of that's part of the plan.
Yep, all that to be part of the plan. And so then
Okay,
when we come up with the
great.
plan of what the strategies are, we would want to have some way that we can measure those. As I referenced before, when there's things that are outside of our control, but we want to, make policy statements that the state should do, something, or we're in support of this type of activity happening. Those we won't be able to see a direct reduction, but there are things that are important for what then comes back to our community. So I would envision some things like that being in the plan that we can't directly put a numerical measure to.
Now, are you doing all this in-house? Are you getting technical assistance from anybody? I know with the Soul Smart, we had
We had the Soul Smart advisor for that.
the advisory, so.
Yeah, so we actually worked with the University of Virginia and their Office for Sustainability
Great.
on doing our update for our inventory, because we had to also pull previous year's inventories and put all those together. And so that should make the process to do the next section of inventories easier that we do. But we would hopefully be able to pull in some sort of expertise, or in some cases, it may be things that are out there of what we can predict for what a certain strategy might have or what the opportunity is.
Because the Alternative Energy Alliance just made an offer tonight. I don't know if that's even possible, or is that, you know, but that was just one of those things, like to play off on what Vice Mayor Hill was saying, tapping into the resources that are here.
Yeah, I mean, if there's resources that make sense to bring in, and that it fits in with what we're seeing as a community of what makes sense for our actual situation on the ground, we're happy to try to integrate whatever we can.
Well, this is excellent. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Excellent work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much.
All right, so we're going to do a 5-minute break.
Oh,
Items are down there. It's good.
thank you.
We're not almost done?
We have 2 hours.
Renaissance night.
Let's finish on Monday.
Yep.
How about that?
And I had a straight face until you go. I just want to say that. It's doing well. Okay, I call this meeting to order.
Dr. Bellamy? Hey, you want a break? You're not the one here.
This is lost.
Dr. Bellamy may or may not be watching Monday Night Football in my office.
All right. So next we have a report on the lighting study follow-up. Good evening.
Councilors. Evening.
Good evening, Mr. Edwards. And Mr. Duncan.
As a follow-up to the lighting study, pedestrian lighting study, just give us a little bit of background before we get into the particulars. But in 2014, there was a series of meetings that were held in the community about issues related to the downtown area and around the mall. And staff was asked to investigate the improvements of the lighting in that area. What was discussed was the lighting has been added incrementally through the years with no overall plan or standard to achieve. So the current lighting that we have is a mixture of city lighting and Dominion Energy, like the Cobra Head type style lighting. So with growing concerns about for better safety measures around the downtown mall and as part of the safety initiative to improve the nighttime visibility, the city of Charlottesville commissioned Arcane K Consultants to develop a lighting study in two areas with the assistance of UVA. We were able to address a couple areas, one being the downtown mall area and the other being the off grounds near the corner. This pedestrian study consisted of 4 major parts: field assessments of the existing lighting conditions, a recommended city lighting standard criteria, preliminary intersection lighting design near the downtown mall area, and then we also got associated costs with that. And then the implementation plan, which ranked every city block in the study areas as a high, medium, or low priorities, and that was both areas A and B. Area A being the ones in your packet shown for the downtown mall, and B being at the corner off-grounds area. Pedestrian lighting study was completed in 2016, and all of this information, there's a lot more than I've got here with me tonight, but it's all on the website, for NDS website. Since there was no industry standard approach, the methodology used was based on the IES RP 8-14, which is from the Illuminating Engineering Society. And this is directly related to study in the level of activity for pedestrian areas. So the study team developed a weighted scoring system, giving the highest percentage to the pedestrian activity, which is 55%. And then there's 3 other measured lighting levels that can be done to gauge the adequacy there: horizontal average, uniformity, and vertical minimum. So they rank those as equally because they're not distinguishable in the standards that they should be weighted differently. So we gave those 15% for each. Pedestrian level maps and weighted priority ranking maps were then created, and this is in your packets as well. Using the ranking system, there were 192 street blocks in areas A and B that were ranked high, medium, and low priority. It was roughly estimated, and I'll stress roughly at this point, that 65 high priority blocks would cost, depending on the pole spacing and the fixture type selected, somewhere between $12.3 million and $20.2 million. This is for the entire areas. Additional study and data would also be required to properly consider the right-of-way, traffic management, utility relocation, and sidewalk repair needs. So that would be additional cost on top of that we anticipate. If we consider all 192 locations, estimated cost, and the first one was the 65 high-priority locations. If we considered all of the locations, high, medium, and low, then we're looking somewhere in the range of $36.5 million to $59.5 million, depending on the pole spacing used and the fixtures and those sort of things. So in light of the high estimate cost, we directed the study team to carve this down and provide us with the top 10 highest priority streets and their cost. So with a 50-foot spacing, pedestrian pole lights would come in around $1.9 million, and at a 30-foot spacing, it would come in around a $3.1 million for those top 10 priority locations. And the top 10 was made up of area A and B, just so you know. The study is also the study also included the preliminary design and cost to upgrade existing intersection locations around the downtown mall area. So we started to focus on that. These include Water Street and Market Street primarily around the downtown mall. So as a first step of implementation in the downtown study area A, the city is focusing on providing additional LED street lighting upgrades to those 15 existing street intersections identified as high to medium pedestrian use. It's felt at this time that this would be a good starting point to initiate, and it would probably give us the most value for the dollar spent. That estimate is $188,000, which you've already approved the first half of, which we'll use to finalize the design on those intersections and to start implementing. The second half of that funding is also requested in the CIP for 2020. We're also looking at potential state grants that may allow us to get some additional funding to start supporting some of those street runs, those city blocks that we were referring to in the top 10 priority.
How about UVA? I mean, since they participated in the study, are they participating in the capital improvement?
They have not indicated that to me at this point, but it's
But that's something we could ask them
pursue.
for.
Yeah. I mean, we're entering into that conversation more and more with the Emmett Street Smart Scale project.
Sure.
And their improvements there. So they have already indicated that they would be contributing towards that.
So how could we make sure that that happens? And, that we begin that conversation in a structured way with UVA about funding, participating in the funding of this lighting installation? I mean, is it at the city manager level? Is it your level? Is it?
It may be both at some point, but we
Okay.
could initiate that, certainly. You know, we have contacts at UVA that
Great.
we're working with that we could initiate that conversation.
Sure, because I do remember that they were very much involved with the lighting study and scoping it, and
Right.
so at this point, it should
Yeah,
be.
one of the areas that kind of jumped out ahead of the study even
Mhm.
a little bit was Emmett Street further down.
Yeah.
They added their own lighting.
Okay.
Just ahead of that, anticipating that that would be one of those areas.
Right.
Great job.
Did you have some comments?
I think that, based on the interest that's been expressed by the office of the COO, that you know, this is certainly a topic that can be handled in those discussions about being more collaborative. It's, we'll hit it at both levels.
Great.
Yeah.
I mean, I just can't imagine that their students aren't giving them that same feedback in terms of a safety concern in some of these areas.
Well, that was the motivation for them to go
Yeah.
into the study itself.
Yeah.
They agreed to participate in it.
Yeah. And so this area B is primarily.
Yeah. around
Yeah,
the
that whole
university
thing
area.
would be,
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you look at the street rankings as a whole,
All the red high.
all of them are very high over
Yeah.
there.
oh, yeah.
And that's what we heard from that the woman who came and spoke to us a few meetings ago, where she went through each street and she talked about how there had just been that attack. I mean, it's very, she gave a
Yeah.
really well put together presentation.
Yeah.
Very compelling.
And again, because these are pedestrian scaled, they're lower to the ground so that it does better lighting of the street. The Cobra lights are very remote.
Yeah, the study actually gives us 4 options, 2 of them being that lower pedestrian level and 2 being the higher, like Dominion Energy would
So
provide.
who would ultimately decide which to pick?
I think it depends on location.
Okay.
And what's available, because one of the benefits and the cost savings that we see in doing the intersections first is because we can utilize some of the existing poles that are there already. So that brings the cost down. And by doing intersections, we don't have as much trenching involved in getting the conduit all the way along the street line. So it's a lot of pedestrian activity, so we feel like we could get a lot more.
But given that, so in the downtown area, and I believe the corner is an historic district, or it's a architectural control district, you're going to have the BAR
Yeah.
working with you. Okay.
Right. Yeah. So we may have slightly different process with different locations.
Okay.
So a quick question about, so this note that says thicker lines are blocks that with reported crimes higher than the 50th percentile, but a lot of those lines are low. Is the study saying that the lighting is already good in those areas, or is it, how was it determined whether it was a low, medium, or high?
Yeah, it was on those percentages that I gave you. That's how they were initially ranked, with a lot of field data that was collected for that to get those lighting levels. And then it was really observation of how pedestrians use these streets. We reached out to a lot of different stakeholders and city staff for those observations. And then they actually went out and observed it themselves as the team. But from the crimes, we did keep that data relating to the locations, but it didn't become one of the main ranking criteria simply because it was difficult to get some consistency of improved lighting and lowering criminal activity. So we didn't feel we could make a proper correlation with that, but we did keep the data in the chart so that it's part of how we can approach any future project if we feel like that's necessary to focus on that.
Okay. I think I do want to, I'll chat with, after I think about this some more, because even the young woman that came and spoke, she was talking about Grady Avenue, which is on this chart, is a low.
Right.
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 So
Depending on where you are on Grady, yeah. It goes all the way up, like half of it's red and half of it's yellow to green.
I don't see the red part. Okay, so, I mean, I can look at that because I didn't look at it before tonight.
Yeah, if you have any other
And
questions,
to ask
just
him
let me
more
know.
questions about that.
Sure.
Tony, do you know, was the crime data that you used limited to non-daylight hours? Or you just took the sample of all crime data? And
Yeah, I think all reported incidents is how
So,
they
I
did
mean,
it. I don't think they
if you're going to
distinguished
make any
between.
correlations based on whether lighting was a factor in crime, you probably need to do some additional cut at that data about
would
when
think
it
so.
actually happened.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking about some of the areas that are in green that I know based on what I'm remembering, that are not well lit. That's what I'm thinking about. That was just a note that was at the bottom of the page, just trying to determine how the high, low, medium was determined. That's it. But I'll think about it a little bit more and drive around.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, and next we have a report, West Main infrastructure update, bike, pedestrian, and ADA.
Thank you, Mayor Walker and councilors. So this is kind of a 6-month update we had presented to you all back in May, presenting a report based on, construction activities, bikes, pedestrians. At that point, you'd asked for us to come back with a few kind of key points, one being the enforcement, an outward-facing map, update on, how the police are going to do. So 2 phases to the enforcement, one within NDS, how we're enforcing the street and sidewalk closure permits, and then the second part of the enforcement is how the police are enforcing that. Mid-block crossing at West Main Street. So we're here to kind of give an update of what all has happened in the last 6 months. So I'll defer to Mr. Durrett here to talk about the enforcement, and then I will fill back in with NDS stuff.
All right. When we started this 6 months ago, there were some questions about what we're going to focus on. A couple of us was the 3-foot rule, passing, driver stopping for pedestrians, parking too far from the curb, which obstructed the bike lane, and monitoring the right hook and red light violations. Those were some of the focus points when we started this. So my unit is in charge of our traffic and parking enforcement. So we dedicated 227 man hours to that area, and that included our ticket counts, along with field operations, who gave bike patrols from the downtown mall all the way up through the corridor during the 6 months period. And at that time, we never saw any violations of the 3-foot rule violation. And out of that, there was 31 hours of no violations were noted by the police officers while we were there. We did note some summonses for speeding, which was 23, with some warning tickets. Majority of the violations that we saw were red light violations. And then the other 8 were other traffic infractions, like driving on a suspended license, reckless driving, and things like that. We did have 1 warning for not stopping for pedestrians during that time frame. So we focused on those, and it was an average in about an hour and 20 minutes per day. And we looked at Monday through Friday from 6 o'clock to 5 o'clock in the afternoon, when we thought there were going to be the most volume of traffic during the weekdays. Any questions about that?
So I guess I'm just wondering, so in terms of that, relative to other examples elsewhere, is that saying that there is no problem, that there is a problem, there's something that needs to be done? How do you assess that?
At that particular time, it was on an average. When you look at, I queried our traffic enforcement from the downtown area for January 1 to present, and then we did the university area from the same time frame, and those downtown inner city was higher in parking violations. So we're staying on this on an average. As you know, West Main is one of the main thoroughfares, so it was high volume traffic. So it's a busy thing, a busy roadway, but a lot of it wasn't that obvious on violations like running stop signs other than when pedestrians are there, so.
So as far as the enforcement kind of goes from the, I guess, the permit holders for street and sidewalk closures, we have kind of revised some of our permit to include a little bit more teeth. We've, kind of taken the policy that if there's, multiple infractions, we will kind of do a notice to comply, give them, a certain time frame, usually a day or two, to make sure that that's fixed. And if it's not, then we'll pull their permit and action.
This is the construction site.
So this would be any, usually it's a construction site. But yeah, any closure of sidewalk, parking, street, if they're not in compliance and they refuse to be in compliance, then we'll pull the permit. And then if they want to come back into compliance, they have to do a resubmittal. So that's kind of their penalty, is the resubmittal of the fee that way. So that's kind of been, I guess, our best enforcement process that we've done. We have also issued the map system that you had asked about. That went live, I don't know, was it a month and a half ago, somewhere around that time frame. Citizens can sign up to get closure data on that. They can view the map and see, what streets are closed, what sidewalks are closed, and get some of the information that way. We did go in the mid-block crossing that was supposed to be done with the standard. That is complete, so that crossing was installed with part of that. Based on the citizen complaint, we did go in at 8th Street in West Main as well, and we updated some of the crossing infrastructure there as far as signage and pavement marking, yield to pedestrian signage and that kind of stuff.
Great. That's nice.
The other thing we did was relative to kind of the downtown business corridor. So we basically took everything from the corner all the way into downtown as we kind of looped in economic development and parking and our Parks and Rec special events staff. So any of the closures over 48 hours kind of in that corridor, we kind of have a email group where those closures go out to that for their comment, to make sure that we're trying to take all of the different parties into account, and everyone's kind of talking to each other. We have also applied for, in the upcoming budget, additional traffic inspector position so that we can kind of stay on top of the contractors and their closures and make sure that they are in compliance without having to rely on citizen complaints that they're no longer in compliance. So that's kind of the highlights of where all we've been in the last 6 months and what we've been doing. So.
I just have a question. Sorry.
I have a little related question. Did your second traffic person, is that position still open, or did you fill that? Or the assistant traffic engineer?
The assistant traffic engineer position is still open.
Okay.
We've got candidates right now we're negotiating with, so hopefully that will work out. But.
Position that Mr. Duncan mentioned is the one we discussed in May, which is really not a traffic engineer.
Yeah, I was asking.
Okay.
But it is an engineer, not a planner. Or is
It's somebody with the technical expertise to go out, inspect sites, and advise people who are on construction sites whether they're
that's
in
the
conformance
position
with
I
our
heard.
standards.
The site inspector.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And that's the one that you're putting in the budget for as a request.
Correct.
But then
I was just asking because I knew that they were down a resource in traffic, and I wanted to understand.
Because that was at the NDS efficiency work session.
This is not a new one. This is someone who has
Okay.
left the
All right.
position. It wasn't a new position. I was just curious. of the
It's
status.
we've had that vacancy since late May.
Okay.
So
Well, I guess my question is, because got a lot of complaints when we had the standard construction, have not gotten many complaints, if any, with regards to the Quark and then the Blue Moon
Yeah, I
project.
guess.
Is that related because of the new permitting?
So some of it's the
Regimen
permitting,
you
some
got?
of it is, I guess I'll speak to some of those kind of construction projects and what we've done kind of through the permit process. Again, I wasn't in this position when the Standard and Sycamore Hotel or Draftsman kind of went in. But, you know, with the Quirk and the Blue Moon development, we've worked with both those developers. We're continuing to work with those developers. They're currently kind of petitioning to revise their closure, but kind of our first initial, anytime anybody comes in, it's, you know, you're providing an alternate pedestrian way if at all possible, and you've got to prove to us you can't.
Okay.
So at least for the first, I guess it's been 6-8 months for the Blue Moon, they've had alternate pedestrian route out into the roadway that they've been using. We've asked that again of the new development that is the core building that's going in where the ice rink is.
Right.
So they're currently assessing whether or not they can feasibly do that. But that is working as well. The second phase of the project at Cherry and Ridge there, I forget the name of that development. They've put in a mid-block crossing with a temporary mid-block crossing there with additional signage on that one because it would have resulted in a close to half-mile detour for pedestrians to kind of get around that.
Okay.
And we've worked with transit to move the bus stop that was in that closure area and stuff as well. So we are continuing to kind of push forward and work with everyone.
Well, all I can say is it's been noticeable.
Thank you.
Thank you, because the complaints have dropped dramatically. I've not gotten any compared to what was going on with the
Good.
Standard and the Sycamore. It just is pretty amazing. So thank you very much. The you know, being direct and proactive and hard line with them seems to be working, and don't give them choices. They just have to do it.
Yep.
And likewise with the, you know, keeping us informed with the information on the traffic violations. What kind of outreach are you giving to the information you're giving to the community about this, so that there's an understanding that you're tracking this? But
Well, our traffic is, you know, they're really robust. They're everywhere. That part is on the norm. I think our society in Charlottesville, they see the little Jeeps and they know what's going to happen to them if they are violating those rules. And we really focus on West Main Street, especially in the 100 block all the way through. So that's routinely patrolled by our traffic CSOs to enforce
Okay.
those parking spaces along with the bicycle lanes.
okay,
Thank you.
thank you very, very much.
All right. Other business? No other business. I'm just joking.
I forget what
So
the
I
business was.
I just brought up a couple times via email that we had gotten a lot of inquiries around the 2nd Street Northeast
Oh,
right
yeah.
away. And we have feedback from the attorney's office, but some of it is more policy related. And so I wasn't sure if it was most appropriate, how we want to handle it. Do we want to just have it be an agenda item for discussion? Or,
I would prefer that.
okay, that's fine.
Okay.
And, yeah, you got the agreement. Sure. 2, 3.
Great.
All right. Anything else?
Can I ask when?
Probably not. Not next meeting.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I just need to, I want to manage expectations.
So it may not be until January, right?
In the meantime, I'm just curious, there's a version that there's some feedback that I've gone through with Mr. Blair that I think we're comfortable with sharing. It's basically, you know, more from the city attorney's perspective, minus like what we're going to weigh in on. So I'd rather give them whatever we have available, if council would agree with giving them that feedback from the attorney's office.
You mean the public that,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
these are just more research into title issues about the property itself in general. That's what the research is. It's and maybe can answer some of the questions that have been posed about the history of the ownership of that particular parcel and its subdivision.
Well, we're not agreeing to.
No, the
No,
other
no,
piece is
these are-
separate from that.
Okay.
Is a decision that we have to
Yeah.
make, which I've posed to you all.
This, what we have prepared is basically just,
Fact.
again, more fact-based as to how the property was divided through the years.
Okay.
So
So
can-
you just
so
wanna
can
know
we
if you
have
can
an
share.
action item? Is it going to be an action item? And can we have a prepared resolution when it comes to us on the agenda? It's a lot better to have it that way than us making them up on the fly. Even if it's just options, right?
We have those though, right?
I mean, I've summarized it in an email. It's pretty straightforward. It's just, are we willing to consider something or not?
But we'd need it in the form of a resolution
I don't,
or an ordinance.
We're not just talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, we can't just be talking about it. We have to have an
Right.
action as a result.
Motion.
Well, it would be a resolution.
Okay.
So right now, you're just asking if,
can I just share what we already
Share.
have produced from the city attorney's office?
Yeah.
And I will do that, and I will let them know that council has decided it wants to discuss this during a council meeting for the portion that is really council's decision.
And their action will be taken in some fashion.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
other,
I have one item, and colleagues have a prepared statement of sorts after meeting with a coalition of local housing providers, inclusive of members of the CHAHC and CLIC. Been working together to develop a comprehensive analysis of our collective capacity to increase affordable housing options. So this group has developed a live model analyzing elements, including costs, necessary to meet the projected need of 4,000 units and people-based housing solutions over the next 10 years. So the group has worked together to build off of the Housing Authority needs assessment, the housing needs assessment, and has begun to quantify resources necessary to produce a full spectrum of housing solutions. So from permanent supportive housing to CRHA redevelopment to affordable home ownership and rehabs, et cetera. And this model is in its final stages of refinement, but preliminary, it tells us that there's a significant dollar amount that will be attached to the need for redevelopment. And I'd like for us to begin to talk about that next week at our housing discussion. There's a number in which that these individuals have, in our meetings that we've discussed, it's pretty significant. It's a multi-million-dollar number, but I think we want to take some more time to refine those numbers and allow you all to take a look at it. And as one of my colleagues in the group said, the house is burning, but success is in our grasp if we think and act boldly enough. So it's a firm belief that we can end housing poverty in Charlottesville and support more than the 4,000 people of our most vulnerable families. So one thing that I would like for us to look at is refer the analysis to the HAC and direct them to report back to us by the middle of December. I also like for us to be clear with staff that we'll be looking for a comprehensive funding strategy with all options on the table to meet the need. And that means however we need to go about having dedicated funding sources or thinking outside the box. I know people have talked about bonds, some have talked about taxes and so forth, but let's have all options on the table. And I just want to make sure I said that to you guys.
Thank you. And low-income housing tax credits are still on the table
Yes,
as
ma'am.
well. So that's not excluded. I know that the gap in financing is great.
Correct.
But that is still a resource.
Correct. And I mean, I think we'll discuss, we'll go more at length at this at our meeting next Monday. But again, I just wanted to put this on your radar and really, if we can, let's get the HAC to start thinking.
So you're saying
about
they're going to
these
give it to the
strategies.
Housing Advisory Committee?
Yes.
And we would like, because the Housing Advisory Committee, we've just met, so we won't meet again until December 19th,
Mhm.
which is after our second December
After our
meeting.
second meeting, okay.
And so I just want to manage expectations. I think it's important to give it to them, but they can't have a discussion and
Okay.
align on their position on that without meeting as a body.
Okay.
All right. Any other? No. All right. So, is there anyone who would like to speak for our last public comment?
Nancy Carpenter, thank you for late evening being able to do this. Thank you for the update, Mr. Murphy, on some important funding. I noticed something really strange this evening in reference to procedure and the probabilities. I'd like to know the statistical probabilities of 7 people being chosen by lottery, which is the preferred method of public comment sign up. 7 people being chosen and speaking on the same exact topic. It happens sometimes that people get chosen through the lottery and they happen to, parse out along the continuum of your public comment list, sometimes similar topics. But it was really weird that happened this evening, and it happened to result in a rather passionate, comment, because the idea is given. I'm not discounting what was said, absolutely not. I'd kind of like to see my great nieces and nephews, have a world to live in and not have to wear masks like they are in California right now. But, it is kind of odd that someone who was number 2 on the list was bumped, and that a large cohort, which is what gave rise to the change in public comment sign up before, were the various times when different activists and advocates came and wanted to speak on a particular topic, whether it was housing or transportation, bus routes, or something to do with the schools or whatever it was, the past few years, that it resulted in many comments from people who were on council saying that that we've heard you once, we don't need to hear 8 of you at one time talking about the same talking points. And that was one of the impetuses to put this new public comment policy in action. And now, after it's been in use for a little over a year, I guess, and it has not resulted in this kind of public spaces, or the spaces being used for this type of public comment. I'm just kind of curious as to, is there an explanation as to how that happened? Is there, I know that I heard secondhand what was told to someone, but I can't believe that would be the truth.
It's run by Sarah.
I can just share with council that, nothing's changed about the process for randomly selecting those speakers. Mr. Blair and I both reviewed all the requests earlier today for public comment, and clearly about 90% of them related to climate change.
So
but how many of them were in the sequence such that as they came one right after the other? That's what I'm questioning, the sequential, randomness of that particular. I know that what I was told, and I was told that because of the number of people who wanted to come and address, because I know the legislative packet has got to go out and make a decision on what you're going to ask the General Assembly to look at.
I remember
and
the-
is there, was there a conscious decision made to group all those folks together instead of putting some on the wait list and some at number 7, one at number 2, or whatever? Just the randomness of how the lottery has been done in the past, it seems to defy what happened in public comment tonight. I'm just saying there was a lot of good people, a lot of interesting topics that some people wanted to talk about, and they weren't able to do that. And that's, that's what the lottery is about. You don't always get a chance to do that, and that's what has been working. But just tonight, there was just the randomness of the selection of everybody, and you said it was 90%, but was that 90% represented in the entire sequence of public comment? That's just what I wanted to say. It was just very odd to me.
But the back half of that, the last 8 people were people who would just have shown up today.
Well, some of them were on the wait list as of 12:30, and then they happened to come in early enough to catch, I think, some of those open slots that you designated for someone to come in after work or whatever before the meeting to sign up. But just the randomness of just that.
But
that
if you have 100 people, it's the way that it was designed at the very beginning was everyone got assigned a random number, like there's random.
Yeah,
numbers
and how
there,
those
and then-
random numbers
but
came
if-
up, 1, 2, 3,
It's
4,
like a
5, 6,
lottery.
7.
If 100
Okay,
people
it
request
could
a
have.
slot,
It was just
and
kind
then
of
there's
weird
8.
to me, and I just wanted to make sure that the process was still, we trying to work with the process as we've been doing over the past year, but just like having, 7 people all in a row, and then having a prepared, comment which supported what was being said in a very, well-spoken way, and certainly, amplifying those talking points, which they should be amplified over and over again. I'm not saying they shouldn't be. It's just, process, because we're all talking about transparency, about a lot of different things. You all were talking about transparency, and I just was a little concerned that there might have not. There might have been a particular, reason or sub-agenda or private agenda that might have put those good folks, right there.
I just know they did a really big outreach because a friend of mine who I have never seen in this chamber was here today, is because he was told, and they reached far and wide to get people who cared about the climate to get into the lottery system. And if there's 90% of them, it doesn't it's certain that there's going to be 7 out of 8 of them that might be talking to. I mean, I don't remember the exact number.
That's fine. That's
there's nothing different that's been done.
And could I have part of that $75,000 back? Because I feel like I got rooked by the DBAC, because they're talking about they only talk to 300 people, and there's like 25,000 people that live a half mile from our downtown mall, and those are the folks that don't have a shopping opportunity down there, and I don't see how 300 people could give a representative need for what's down there. So I'm sure they didn't go knocking on Crescent Halls.
They were knocking on business. I think it was business.
Mostly businesses.
Stakeholders, because it was the Downtown Business Association.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, anyone else would like to speak?
Good evening, Tony Wash. I just wanted to wish each of you and your families a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. And happy Thanksgiving, everybody.